The winter snow had just started to melt in Kyoto, but the air was still biting cold. It was early March in the 53rd year of the Dashwan era. I stood in a quiet courtyard within the Jindong marquee mansion, my thin clothes soaked with sweat. I didn't care about the freezing wind. I was focused on the blade in my hand. My face was flushed, and my blood felt like it was boiling as I pushed my body to its absolute limit. I gripped the long saber tight. The blade glowed with a dull, crimson light as I slashed through the air, leaving faint ripples in my wake. Every time I swung, a line of small text flickered in the corner of my vision. One successful swing, 1 point of proficiency. Again and again, the notification scrolled by. Then, everything changed. The text told me my basic saber technique had reached perfection. I had unlocked the demon-breaking saber. My internal energy hit the peak of the 9th rank. The system asked if I wanted to break through. I didn't hesitate. My blood roared. It felt like my veins were filled with liquid fire. Suddenly, a phantom of a massive, red sun manifested behind my back. It looked like the first sunrise of a new world, piercing through the darkness. My body trembled violently. The heat was unbearable, like I was made of molten lava. I stared forward, my expression grim, and delivered one final strike. The air in the courtyard shifted instantly. It felt like the dead of winter had been replaced by the heat of midsummer. I heard a sharp crack inside my chest. It was the sound of an invisible shackle breaking. The pent-up energy inside me found an exit, rushing through my body like a great river heading for the sea. I opened my eyes, and for a split second, a golden light flickered in my pupils. They seemed to merge into one, the mark of a saint, before fading away. I took a deep breath and calmed my aura. I looked like an ordinary teenager again. I had been in this world for 2 months, and I had finally reached the 8th rank, the refining essence realm. I couldn't help but smile. I had managed to log into this mysterious game world years before it was even supposed to open. Back on Earth, no one knew where this game came from. Only a few lucky people were chosen to enter this hyper-realistic world. Most players wouldn't arrive until the era of the Great Empress, but right now, Emperor One was still on the throne. I was in the middle of a brutal struggle for succession between 2 princes. I knew exactly what was coming in 5 years. The 3rd prince would launch a coup. He would lead his army into the capital, storm the White Tiger Gate, and murder the crown prince. He would go on a localized killing spree, slaughtering almost every member of the royal bloodline. But he wasn't the final winner. I remembered the history from my past life. A hidden dragon was waiting in the shadows. The 2nd princess would descend like a god, wielding the founder's sword. She would wipe out the rebels and paint the white snow red with their blood. She would become the 1st empress, starting a golden age of absolute power. I looked down at my palm. A faint mark of a jade seal was etched there, visible only to me. It was carved with 9 dragons and surrounded by a mysterious purple mist. I could see stars and planets rotating around it. This seal was the reason I was here 11 years early. It was my greatest secret. I grabbed a towel and started wiping the sweat from my body. I needed to move fast. Right now, the empire was a mess. Bandits were everywhere, and local lords were carving out their own territories. It was chaotic, but chaos meant opportunity. Once the empress took the throne and stabilized the country, the chance to rise from nothing would disappear. I had to build my own power and influence now, before the players even arrived. If I waited until the era of peace, I'd just be another subject under her thumb. My starting position wasn't bad. I was born into the Jindong marquee mansion. Our family had been powerful for 800 years. My ancestor, Xia Xuanjin, was a legendary general who helped Emperor Wuzong retake the capital centuries ago. He was a god of war who led 5,000 riders across 10,000 miles to kill the enemy leader and save the empire. He was so successful that people whispered he should have been made a king, not just a marquis. Now, 17 generations later, the family was still thriving. Even though I wasn't the most important person in this house, I had a name and a foundation. For a player who knew the future, this was the perfect head start. I looked out at the melting snow and tightened my grip on the towel. The world was about to burn, and I was going to be the one holding the torch. Most players started this game as nobodies, common soldiers, or even beggars on the street. It was a hell mode start. According to the game's balancing logic, the earlier you entered the world, the worse your starting identity was supposed to be. But I had broken that rule. I was Xia Chun, born into a family of high-ranking nobles and generals. Third young master. A letter from the second master. A frantic figure rushed into my courtyard. It was Xia Qian, a young servant in light clothes. He was panting heavily, his cheeks flushed red, either from the biting cold wind or the sprint he'd just made. I looked at him calmly. I had spent years in this courtyard, practicing my blade 10,000 times a day, honing my martial arts until I finally created my own technique, the first style of the demon-breaking blade. My body was ready. My mind was sharp. A letter from my father? I asked, taking the parchment from his hand. I felt no joy, only a strange sense of curiosity. Has something happened outside? It's been 3 years since the last one. Master is truly a prophet, Xia Qian exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. Great news. The second master killed a third-rank peerless demon in the eastern wilderness. It was a regional overlord. After that battle, the demon hordes retreated 100 miles. The threat is gone. Our empire's prestige is restored. Xia Qian was only 16, a year younger than me. He looked as proud as if he had killed the beast himself. Everyone is saying the wilderness will be fully pacified within a year or two, he continued, his voice trembling with emotion. Then the second master and the second mistress can finally return home. After 14 years, you'll finally be reunited with your family. I didn't share his excitement. Unlike other players who just logged in, I had inherited all of Xia Qian's memories and emotions. I felt like I had lived his life, only awakening to my past life's memories 2 months ago. I remembered my father, Xia Yuan, the Marquis of Dong'an. In my early memories, before I was 3, he adored me. But then came the martial testing. I was diagnosed with a waste body, a useless constitution for cultivation. My father had gone silent that day. Then, with a hardened gaze, he told me, "My son may have a waste body, but as my eldest, I will find a way to change your fate." The next day, the demon tide erupted. He was appointed commander-in-chief of the Eastern Army. My mother, Su Xiaoxue, a powerful sorceress, went with him. I was only 3 years old. I begged to go, but they refused. It was too dangerous. They left me behind in the Marquis mansion. They had been gone for 14 years. At first, letters and demon blood for my training arrived every 3 months. After 5 months, the letters slowed down. I told myself they were busy with the war. A year later, I heard the truth from the servants. My mother was pregnant again. Once my brother was born in the war zone, the letters became rare, once every 6 months, then once a year. The resources stopped coming entirely. I still tried to believe they were just busy, until the rumors reached me. My younger brother, Xia Hao, who had been raised by their side in the camps, was a genius. He possessed a supreme immortal bone. That was when I realized I hadn't been protected. I had been abandoned. I was used to my quiet life now. I was a ghost in the mansion, but my uncle and aunt treated me well. But now, my parents were coming back with a brother I'd never met. A boy with a bone that would shine like a sun once the spiritual chi returned to the world. To them, I was a stranger with their blood. "Go now," I said to Xia Qian, giving him a small smile. "Tell the kitchen to double my lunch portions today." The boy looked stunned. "Double it? Master, you already eat enough for 10 people. You want 20 portions?" I nodded. My training consumed massive amounts of energy. As he ran off, I looked down at the yellowish envelope in my hand. It was embossed with a Qilin pattern. I drew my red blade and lightly sliced my finger. A drop of hot, crimson blood fell onto the seal. The Qilin pattern flared with light, and for a second, I heard a faint, ghostly roar. This was my mother's work. In this era, before the true awakening of magic, there were still high martial experts, warriors who could face armies and sorcerers who could part rivers. My mother was a powerful sorceress. This letter was bloodlocked. Only I could open it. This was a bloodlock technique, a method used to prevent outsiders from intercepting a message. It was a sophisticated art that a crude martial artist could never master. I opened the envelope. The Xin paper inside was high quality, feeling smooth and delicate against my skin. But there were only a few words written on it. "I will return home in 6 months to 2 years at most." Once I arrive, I will arrange your marriage. You are my son. You are to marry the second princess. Perform well. Do not disgrace the prestige of the Marquis's mansion. Coldness. That was the first thing I felt when I read those words. I wasn't surprised by the first half of the letter. The Great Eastern Catastrophe had been a brutal era. In this world, everything was ranked within 9 grades, whether you were a warrior, a sorcerer, or a demon. A third-grade great demon was a rarity, a creature with power that few on Earth could match. My father had been fighting a war against such a beast for 14 years. It made sense that the conflict was finally ending. It was the second half of the letter that made my pupils shrink. I was supposed to marry a princess? Not just any princess, but the second princess. The woman who, in the future, would become the empress. I stood in the courtyard as the spring breeze carried a sharp chill. My heart wouldn't stop racing. The empress was the most powerful existence in the Great Unification version of this world. She was the one who would eventually force the entire world to submit, gathering the world's destiny to establish laws that would last 10,000 years. She was a visionary. She would build temples and make a grand vow to the heavens, forcibly transforming the Great Wu dynasty into a destiny dynasty before its time. Within the borders of Great Wu, her power suppressed everything. Anyone who wasn't a subject of the empire was considered a heretic, their cultivation slowing to a crawl. But if you held an official rank, you could tap into the empire's destiny to accelerate your training. She would trap all the world's heroes in her web. That wouldn't change until the spiritual chi fully recovered and the realms merged, causing the empress to vanish and the empire to crumble. I tried to recall more details. In my past life, I had played this world like a game. I hadn't paid much attention to the early lore because it felt like flavor text. It wasn't until the realms merged and the game became reality, and we lost our immortality, that I realized how much I'd missed. I had never heard of the empress having a fiancé. I shook my head, trying to piece it together. When I first entered this world in my previous life, it was already the early stages of the Great Unification. No one knew what the empress had gone through back when she was just the second daughter of Emperor One. Wait, something clicked. During the Great Unification era, the Jindong Marquis mansion remained incredibly powerful. It produced genius after genius. My younger brother, Xia Hao, the one with the supreme immortal bone, became the pillar of the empire. He was the empress's sharpest spear, conquering territories and earning the title of King of Jindong. There had been rumors back then. People whispered that Xia Hao was only made a king because the empress had a secret debt. They said that when she was struggling for power, she had a marriage contract with an ordinary son of the Jindong family. That son supposedly died in a bloody palace coup. After she took the throne, the marriage was forgotten, and Xia Hao's promotion was her way of compensating the family. I used to think those were just baseless rumors meant to slander the empress. Now, I realized they were true. The ordinary son, who didn't even leave a name in the history books, was me. I was a piece of dark history. An embarrassing past that would only stain the empress's glorious image. That's why I didn't have a name in the records. I let out a self-deprecating laugh. Deep in my eyes, the double-pupil vision flickered again. The pupils merged like the sun and moon, and a faint, chaotic mist swirled within them. My gaze turned cold. So, my story was supposed to end at the palace coup. No wonder no one ever mentioned that the legendary Xia Hao had an older brother. My expression turned calm, like the still waters of a deep abyss. I went inside and changed into a set of fine robes. There used to be maids in my courtyard, but the mansion had removed them once I turned 12. It wasn't out of cruelty. Every male in the family was treated this way. Before reaching the 8th grade of cultivation, a martial artist had to remain celibate. Having beautiful maids around was considered too much of a distraction for young men full of hot blood. As I stepped out of the courtyard, a beautiful girl in a green dress approached me. She looked to be about 16. Baizhu, I said, recognizing her. Third young master, she said, bowing respectfully. The master and madam have asked for you. She wasn't arrogant or dismissive like the servants in some stories. Even though I was a nobody in the mansion, she treated me with genuine deference. I understand, I nodded. I followed her through the winding paths of the outer courtyard. As I watched her walk, I felt a sudden surge of heat in my blood. I had just broken through my cultivation level, and my energy was peaking. I had to look away and focus on something else to keep my composure. I started mental mapping the family hierarchy. The Marquis's mansion had a 600-year history, now split into three main branches. The old Marquis, Xia Chutian, was 86 years old, but still full of vitality. He was in seclusion, chasing a higher realm of power. He had three sons. The eldest was Xia Qian, the current head of the house. The second was my father, Xia Yuan. The third was my uncle, Xia Han. Baizhu led me into a large hall. Sitting at the head of the room was a dignified middle-aged man and a woman in her 30s who looked elegant and well-maintained. "Uncle, aunt," I said, bowing. "Chen'er, we're family. No need for such formalities," Xia Qian said with a smile. The woman, Chui Mingru, looked at me with a playful pout. "I haven't seen you in my courtyard for a meal in so long. Are you becoming distant because you heard your mother is coming back?" Her eyes were full of warmth and maturity. "I've been practicing my martial arts lately, aunt. I've been a bit preoccupied," I said, sitting down beside her. I felt a genuine sense of warmth in my chest. My biological mother might have ignored me for years, pouring all her love into my brother, but my uncle and aunt had always been good to me. They never looked down on me for being born with a wasted body. If I had grown up without suffering, it was because of them. When they heard me mention practicing martial arts, their expressions dimmed for a moment. They shared a silent, pitying look. In their eyes, a wasted body could practice all it wanted, but it would never amount to anything. I knew that in their eyes, no matter how hard I worked, my efforts were useless. 100 times the sweat only brought a fraction of the results. My uncle, Xia Qian, and my aunt, Chui Mingru, began asking if I needed anything in my courtyard. We talked and laughed like a real family. "Your father performed great deeds in the East," Xia Qian said, finally getting to the point. "The emperor has granted a marriage contract. He's betrothed the second princess to you. Did you know?" "I just found out," I replied, my expression turning serious. "Uncle, is there any room for negotiation?" I didn't want to marry a princess. To an outsider, it was a supreme honor. To me, it was a golden cage. Marrying into the royal family would limit my freedom and tie the Marquis's estate too closely to the throne. More importantly, that princess was the future empress. Marrying her was suicide. I still didn't know how I died in my past life, and I wasn't eager to find out again. My biological parents had been at the borders for 14 years. They barely wrote. They didn't care about the son with the wasted body they left behind at 3 years old. My uncle and aunt were the ones who raised me. The Xia family had stood for 600 years because of talent, not royal favor. In a world split between the Great Wu, the Great Feng, and the Great Qing, with demons in the east and sorcery in the south, the empire needed us. We didn't need to beg for scraps from the emperor. This marriage wasn't a gift, it was a leash. "You don't want to marry her?" Chui Mingru asked softly. Her eyes searched mine. "I don't," I said firmly. Xia Qian sighed and shook his head. "There is no room left. The imperial decree has already left the palace gates. It will be here any moment." I fell silent. I was the protagonist of this wedding, yet I was the last to know. It was a joke. "The marriage wasn't originally meant for you," my aunt added, her voice filled with pity. "The emperor wanted your younger brother, Xia Hao." She explained the truth. When the messenger reached the eastern borders, my parents refused. They claimed Xia Hao was too young and needed to focus on his martial arts. Then, they proactively wrote to the emperor, suggesting me instead. I was the eldest son, after all. The emperor stayed silent for 3 days before finally agreeing this morning. I felt a cold irony settle in my chest. To a commoner, being a prince consort was a dream. For a noble, it was a dead end. 600 years ago, corrupt relatives of the throne nearly toppled the empire. Since then, law forbade in-laws of the emperor from holding real power. My father, Xia Yuan, knew this. He didn't want his genius, younger son's future ruined by a princess. So, he remembered he had an older son rotting away in the capital. He threw me to the wolves to save his favorite. I was just a pawn in a game of political compromise. Even the future empress was being used as a tool before she took power. I smiled thinly. I could accept this. I was resilient. But the fact that I was the backup choice because my brother rejected her, that stung. I couldn't control my own destiny. Not yet. Master, madam, Baiju said, entering the hall with hurried but graceful steps. The palace officials have arrived. Eunuch Yi is leading them. My uncle and aunt looked at each other. They knew why he was here. Chen'er, come with us to receive the decree, Xiaqian said. I stood up silently and followed them to the main gates. There stood Eunuch Yi. His hair was white, but his skin was as smooth as a child's. He had served 3 generations of kings and would survive the bloody coups of the future. He was a monster in disguise, a pillar of the royal family's hidden strength. So, this is the eldest son of the Marquis of Anong? Eunuch Yi said, smiling at me. Quite a handsome young man. I looked at Eunuch Yi, the man who would later play a bloody, pivotal role in the Palace Gate coup. I didn't show my inner turmoil. Instead, I gave him a respectful, formal bow. He looked surprised for a second. Most noble sons were either too arrogant or too terrified to acknowledge him properly, but he quickly recovered and nodded back with a faint smile. I could tell I'd made a good first impression. Even though I was the protagonist of this story, the events unfolding now were larger than me. I was just the figurehead they needed. I led Eunuch Yi into the Marquis's estate. What followed was a blur of ancient protocol. I had to bathe, change into ceremonial robes, and prepare my mind. Finally, Eunuch Yi read the imperial decree aloud. I knelt, accepted the scroll with both hands, and just like that, the marriage was official. The whole process left my head spinning. Most imperial decrees were simple verbal commands or written notes, but a royal marriage was different. It required grueling rituals to show the world that both the Marquis's house and the princess were being treated with the highest honor. By the time we finished, it was late afternoon. I stood there holding the heavy scroll. It was decorated with golden dragons and made of a material I couldn't identify. It felt like a dream. I was officially the fiancé of the future empress. But a dark thought nagged at me. In the original timeline, I died during the coup. Was that really an accident? Or was I murdered? I looked at my uncle and aunt walking ahead of me. I couldn't afford to be a passive pawn anymore. I hurried to catch up with them. Uncle, I said, my voice steady and loud. I've broken through. I'm now in the 8th rank, the essence refining realm. I want to find a position in the government. I want to serve the country. I took a deep breath. I remembered the history books of this world. They said the founding emperor was once like me, quiet, reserved, and overlooked by his kin. Yet the empress of that era saw the hidden talent within him and chose him as her husband. I needed that same recognition. We were walking along a winding stone path in the estate's garden. Spring had just arrived, and the flowers were fighting to bloom, filling the air with a thick, sweet scent. Xiaqian and Cui Mingru stopped dead in their tracks. They turned around, eyes wide with shock. You reached the 8th rank? My uncle asked. In the capital, the 8th rank wasn't world-shaking. I was 17, which made me a talent, but the Marquis's house was full of geniuses and monsters. Usually, they wouldn't even blink at an 8th rank breakthrough. But I was different. They knew my history. For years, despite all the rare herbs and expensive medicines my uncle had poured into me, I had stayed stuck at the bottom. I was the martial arts trash. I had a moment of clarity a few days ago, I explained, sticking close to the truth but hiding the system's influence. I was practicing the basic saber techniques, and I just understood something. I found a new path within the forms, and the breakthrough happened naturally. I knew I couldn't hide forever. If I wanted the Marquis's resources to grow strong, I had to show them I was worth the investment. Show me, Xiaqian said, his face turning serious. The basic saber technique of our house wasn't actually basic. It had been refined over 600 years, modeled after the imperial family's own styles. It was perfected for the 9th rank to build a foundation. No one, not my uncle, not my father, not even my grandfather, had ever managed to improve it. Give him a sword, I told a servant. Use mine, Xiaqian interrupted. He pulled a heavy, pitch-black longsword from his waist. As the blade left the sheath, I felt a chill. For a split second, I saw a vision of a black flood dragon leaping from an abyss, its scales dark enough to swallow light. It was a divine weapon, forged in the blood of a high-level demon and infused with its soul. I gripped the hilt with both hands. It was incredibly heavy. If I were still in the 9th rank, I wouldn't have even been able to swing it. My uncle nodded, satisfied that I could at least hold the weight. He was waiting to see this enlightenment I claimed to have found. I felt the blood in my veins begin to boil. I channeled my inner energy, and a faint silhouette of a rising sun appeared behind me. My aunt, a powerful sorceress, narrowed her eyes. She could feel the energy shift in the air. I was drawing in the essence of the sun itself. Sun Guardian Demon Breaking Strike. I warred. I stood in the center of the garden, but in my mind, I was facing an army of demons. I swung the black blade. A flash of brilliant light, like a miniature sun, erupted from the edge of the sword. My uncle reached out and caught the force of the blow with his bare palm. It didn't break his skin, but his face went pale with shock. You actually improved the foundation technique, he whispered. It's more than that, my aunt added, her voice filled with wonder. This isn't just a way to kill enemies. This technique draws in solar essence to temper the flesh from the inside out. It's a dual-purpose cultivation art. My aunt and uncle stared at me, their faces masks of disbelief. They knew what they had just seen shouldn't be possible for a simple martial artist. Usually, warriors are blunt instruments. We train our bodies, but we can't communicate with the energy of heaven and earth like sorcerers can. Chui Mingru, my aunt, couldn't keep her composure. She was a powerful sorceress, and she realized immediately that my blade work was a hybrid of martial arts and magic. It was something entirely new to this world. My uncle, Xia Qian, wasn't a sorcerer, but he was a veteran. He understood the mechanics of power. To reach the higher ranks of martial arts, you have to temper your flesh and blood. Most people do this through decades of grueling labor or by consuming incredibly rare and expensive herbs. But I had just bypassed all of that. By drawing solar essence directly into my body through the strike, I could cultivate at a speed that would make geniuses look like snails. Keep this technique a secret, Xia Qian said, his voice dropping to a low, serious growl. He glanced sharply at the servants and maids standing nearby. I saw a flash of coldness in his eyes. These were loyal family retainers, but if they weren't, I knew they wouldn't have lived to see sunset. A technique like this was worth a kingdom. Are you willing to offer this to the family? He asked. I leave that entirely to you, uncle. I replied without a second of hesitation. I wasn't being generous. I was being practical. I had exposed my talent specifically to trade it for resources. The family had spent a fortune on me over the years when everyone thought I was trash. Giving this back was just settling the debt and buying my way out. Good, Xia Qian said, his voice booming with pride. Chenair, you have done a great service for the clan. I will report your merit to the Hall of Ancestors. You are authorized to enter the Scripture Pavilion and choose any high-level manual you desire. And about that job you wanted outside the capital, I'll make sure it happens. I smiled. The Marquis's estate had survived for 600 years because it rewarded merit fairly. I didn't care about the glory, though. I just wanted out. The estate was a gilded cage. It was powerful, yes, but it wasn't mine. To survive the coming coup, I needed my own foundation. I needed to build my own power base where I was the one making the rules. Why climb from the bottom when I could use the family's influence to leapfrog into a position of authority? I wasn't the type of person to suffer needlessly just to prove a point. I followed my uncle to the Hall of Ancestors to record my new technique, officially naming it the Sun Guardian Demon Breaking Blade. Meanwhile, across the capital, the atmosphere was much colder. East of the Imperial Palace sat a low-profile but massive estate, the Yaoguang Princess Manor. This was the home of the second princess. She was young, barely 20, but she was different from her sisters. She had moved out of the palace months ago, a move that broke every rule of imperial etiquette. No one knew what she had said to the emperor to get his permission, but the rumors stopped the moment the marriage decree was issued. She had been promised to me, the useless, eldest son of the Marquis of Anong. Inside her front hall, 3 women and 2 men sat in tense silence. Their eyes kept drifting to the imperial decree sitting carelessly on a side table. The princess sat at the head of the room. She was breathtaking. Her skin was like fine jade, and her eyes were as deep and calm as a starlit lake. Even in a room full of nobles, she made everyone else look like background noise. Princess, that Xia Chun is a nobody. One of her female attendants snapped, unable to hold back her anger. He's a ghost in his own home. He's beneath you. How can he be worthy of your hand? What's done is done, the princess replied. Her voice was flat, showing no emotion at all. The emperor has spoken. The world knows. Maybe we should just kill him, a man on the left suggested, his voice dark. He's not even liked in the Marquis's house. His father hasn't seen him in 14 years. If he dies, who would truly care? Don't be a fool, interrupted Hu Qiming, a scholar from the National Academy. Assassination is a messy tool. Whether you succeed or fail, it ends in disaster. Xia Chun might be trash, but he is still the legal heir. This marriage isn't about him. It's about the emperor tying the Marquis's military power to the throne. If Xia Chun dies, the emperor will just pick another son from the family to marry her. It changes nothing. The man who suggested the hit, Su Jun, looked ready to argue, but he stayed quiet under the princess's gaze. The princess, Yao Wang, watched them both. She was disappointed in Su Jun. She had recruited these men as advisors, but only Hu Qiming seemed to understand the bigger picture. You don't solve political problems with cheap daggers. The Marquis of Andong's family was a lion that had been sleeping, but it still had claws. My grandfather, Xia Chutian, was a legend. 36 years ago, he had led an army of 200,000 and nearly wiped a rival empire off the map. He only stopped because he was 30 miles from their capital. After that victory, he did the smartest thing a general could do. He gave up his command and went into seclusion. He traded his power for the emperor's trust. That move allowed the next generation, my uncles and my father, to rise. They became the new leaders of the military. My uncle Xia Qian had followed the same path, winning glory and then retiring to manage the estate. They were playing a long, careful game of survival. And now, I was the next piece on the board. My father, Xia Yuan, had been at the frontier for 14 years, holding the line. To the world, I was a pawn being traded for a political alliance. But they didn't know the pawn had already reached the end of the board and turned into something else entirely. My father, Xia Yuan, had been the commander of the Eastern Desolation for 13 years. He played it safe, making no major mistakes, but winning no grand victories. The court was relieved. They thought he was steady, but not a genius like my grandfather or my eldest uncle. They were wrong. A month ago, after 13 years of hiding his true strength, my father exploded. He slaughtered a third-ranked great demon in a single strike, sending shockwaves through the empire. One family, 3 commanders. It was enough to make the world tremble and the imperial family grow cold with fear. But the world was in chaos, and the Great Wu Empire wasn't the only power on the map. The emperor knew he couldn't crush the Marquis's house. Not yet. He had to win us over. In a situation like this, assassination was a stupid move. Princess Yao Wang knew it. I was a trash body, a useless pawn in a marriage alliance. Why waste a blade on me? The Marquis of Anong is loyal, Yao Wang said with a bright, shallow smile that lit up the hall. I am happy to share my father's burdens. Her eyes, however, remained cold. She had an ambition she shared with no one. She didn't stay in the palace like other princesses because she wanted more. Who said a woman couldn't rule the world? She intended to be the first. Meanwhile, deep within the Marquis's estate, I stood inside a magnificent 7-story ancient tower. 7 elders, the pillars of our family, stared at the ground in stunned silence. One had jumped out of his seat. Another had accidentally plucked out a strand of his white beard. A third had spilled tea all over his robes. The foundation art actually improved, one whispered. The Sun Guardian strike was our bedrock. It was the secret that kept our family powerful for 600 years. Every great house hoards its knowledge to stay on top. Our technique was created by our ancestor, Xia Xuanjin, and refined by every generation since. We thought it was perfect. We thought it was equal to the imperial family's own arts. And then I showed up. I had just performed the revised version right in front of them. The scorched crack in the floor, pulsing with solar essence, was all the proof they needed. Good. Excellent. The eldest among them, Xia Yu, burst into a loud laugh. He was my grandfather's older brother, my great-uncle. Your martial talent might be lacking, but your comprehension is godlike. Your contribution to the clan is greater than your father's." His eyes shone with a mix of pride and deep regret. It was unfair. Heaven had given me the mind of a sage but the body of a weakling. If I had both, I would have been a monster. Military merit is nothing compared to creating a new path for our descendants, added my fifth grandfather, Xiaxian. Our family already held 3 marquis titles. We didn't need more medals, we needed stronger blood. My improvement meant every future child of the Xia family would train faster and hit harder. I eventually left the tower. It was my first time meeting those old men, and I knew I had secured my position. They even talked about putting my name in the ancestral records and giving me a seat in the family shrine after I died. I didn't care about being a ghost hero, though. I wanted to stay alive. I walked through the back gardens toward the martial arts field. The air was thick with the sounds of shouting and stone hitting dirt. 5-year-olds were practicing punches. 12-year-olds were swinging spears that flashed like lightning. Brother Chun, a boy about 13 years old, dropped a massive boulder and sprinted toward me like a nimble monkey. This was Xiao Wen, my cousin. His father, my uncle Xiao Han, was a scholar who hated violence. He had named his son Wen, meaning literature, hoping for a bookworm. Instead, Xiao Wen was a martial prodigy who hated reading. Because I was talentless, Uncle Xiao Han used to take me in to teach me the ways of the scholar. I spent most of my childhood in his courtyard, so Xiao Wen and I were close. "Are you here to see me?" he asked, grinning like an idiot. "I'm heading to the library pavilion to pick a manual," I said, patting his shoulder. "Just passing through." I looked around the field. Most of the people my age were gone. In our family, once you hit the 8th rank, you were sent out into the world or the military to prove yourself. I was the only one left behind. "Brother Chun," another voice called out. I turned and saw a little girl, about 10 years old, looking like a carved jade doll in her training clothes. The little girl walked toward me, her steps shy and hesitant. Her cheeks were flushed red, and she was breathing heavily, clearly having just finished a set of fist techniques. This was Xia Yushi, the young daughter of Uncle Xia Qian and Aunt Shui Mingru. "Brother Chun," she whispered. A few more teenagers followed her over. Some were from the 7 ancestral branches. Others were talented disciples from the side lineages. They hesitated for a moment before joining the group. I heard them whispering among themselves. They knew I was from the direct line of the Marquis, but they also knew my reputation. In the Marquis of Andong's household, martial prowess was everything. For years, I had been the invisible one, the first martial waste born into the family in generations. Some of them smiled and greeted me warmly. Others remained calm, giving me a polite nod. They weren't friendly, but they weren't hostile either. None of them mocked me. They were young, but in a house like ours, everyone grew up fast. They were smart enough to know that you don't insult a direct descendant, even one without talent. Besides, word had already spread that I was now the fiancé of the future empress. There was no reason to make an enemy of a royal consort. Plus, by seniority, I was the elder brother to everyone on this field. Our family had stood for 600 years. Respect for elders was drilled into our bones. I smiled back at each of them, my voice gentle and welcoming. I wanted them to feel like they were basking in a spring breeze. But as I looked at a few specific boys, my heart grew heavy with focus. I knew who they were. In the future, I remembered, these boys would become legends. Xiao Wen, the boy currently grinning at my side, was one of them. He was a natural genius who had always been close to me, even when I was at my lowest. He didn't care about my lack of talent. He just saw me as his brother. It was break time on the field. The instructors watched us gathering, but didn't stop the chatter. My gaze shifted to a cold, distant boy about 12 years old standing on the edge of the group. His name was Xiao Chen. He was from a side branch, but in the coming era of unification, he would become a god of war. He would lead the great Wu heavy cavalry and sweep across the battlefields of the eastern wilderness. Right now, though, he was just a kid with a stoic face. Then there was Xia Haoyu, the grandson of my 6th grandfather. His future achievements were just as staggering. "Brother Chen, are you going out for training?" Xiao Wen asked, his eyes bright with excitement. I told him the truth, that I was heading to the library pavilion to pick out some manuals before leaving the estate. "I'm almost at the 8th rank myself," Xiao Wen chirped, his voice full of honest enthusiasm. "Once I break through, I'll come find you." I stared at him, stunned. Xiaowen wasn't even 12 yet. To be on the verge of the 8th rank at that age was terrifying. The legends were true. The golden generation was beginning to emerge. Talent was popping up everywhere like bamboo shoots after a rain, both in our family and across the Great Wu dynasty. A great tide was coming. The 600 years of our family's accumulated fortune was about to explode, pushing us to new heights. I had to seize this momentum before the world changed forever. I left the field and headed for the library pavilion. It was a massive 7-story building. I had only been here once before to learn basic blade techniques, but because of my contribution with the new manual, I had been given special permission to enter any floor below the 6th. I didn't rush to the higher levels. Instead, I started on the 1st floor. I walked to the right-hand shelf and picked up a book. Swift Wind Sword Technique. I flipped through the pages rapidly. My eyes scanned the text, but my mind wasn't on the sword moves at all. Record technique, I said internally. A progress bar appeared in my vision. Recording, 1%, 25%, 100%. A virtual panel flickered in my mind. Even though I was no longer a player in this world, my auxiliary system had stayed with me. It was fully unlocked now. It could help me comprehend advanced moves, and, more importantly, it could record every manual I touched. Back when this world was a game, the initial players only had a basic proficiency system. But my system had already evolved to the Spirit Chi Resurrection version. By the time the players eventually arrived during the Empress's reign, I would be running on a version of the world they couldn't even imagine. I would crush them. I walked through the 1st floor like a tourist, barely looking at the covers. In reality, I was vacuuming up the family's 600-year history. The collection was vast, but I focused on the most important manuals before moving to the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor was for the 8th rank, the essence refining realm. It was packed with manuals for swords, sabers, spears, and halberds. There were body tempering techniques and even military formation scrolls. I even spotted a few manuals for Taoist sorcery, spoils of war from when our family had crushed rebellious sects in the past. I focused heavily on the military formations. In this world, individual warriors were terrifying, but soldiers organized into a formation could condense a slaughter aura strong enough to kill high-level masters. Most of what I found were small-scale, 3- or 5-man squads. I wasn't disappointed. These formations were the lifeblood of military families. The truly elite formations, the ones for 10,000 or 100,000 men, allowed a commander to gather the strength of an entire army into their own body. It allowed a general to fight enemies levels above their own. Those would be on the 5th floor or higher. In the entire Great Wu dynasty, less than 10 families possessed formations of that caliber. Deep in the shadows of the pavilion, 2 old men watched me. These were my grandfathers, Xia Huang and Xia Hong. They were the guardians of this place. They had been told about my breakthrough and the improved blade technique, so they were watching me closely. "What is he doing?" Xia Hong whispered, stroking his white beard. "He's just glancing at them and putting them back." "How should I know?" Xia Huang grumbled. "The boy has high comprehension, but he's too young. He's flighty. If he doesn't focus, his future will be limited." Xia Hong shook his head, unimpressed by my behavior. A martial artist needs to be decisive. You pick a path and you break through like a crashing wave. This boy is picking up everything and studying nothing. He lacks a steady heart. He sighed, looking away. No wonder Xia Yuan ignores this child and puts all his hope into the younger son, Xia Hao. What a waste of potential. I had no idea I was being watched. I didn't know 2 powerful elders were dissecting my every move, judging my character based on a few minutes of observation. Even if I had known, I wouldn't have cared. My focus was elsewhere. On the surface, I remained calm and composed. Inside, I was ecstatic. My eyes drifted toward my system panel, watching the progress bars hit 100% one after another. A faint smile played on my lips. My goal was simple. I was going to empty this entire pavilion. Every secret, every technique, every scrap of knowledge belonging to the Marquis of Anong was going to be mine. An hour passed quickly. I finished recording the special techniques on the 2nd floor and moved to the 3rd. The selection here was smaller, but the quality was on another level. I even found Buddhist scriptures and Taoist texts tucked away in a corner. These caught my eye immediately. In the future era of spiritual recovery, these weren't just religious books, they were gold mines. I knew what was coming. In the future, people would derive the Arhat breathing method from simple scriptures. Others would visualize the palace of peace from basic Taoist texts and ascend to the transcendent realm in a single leap. I prioritized these immediately, letting my system scan every word. I didn't stop there. I moved to the 4th floor, then the 5th. The 5th floor was vast, yet it held only about 100 manuals. The higher the floor, the longer the scan took. On the 1st floor, a book took seconds. Here, it took minutes. I waited patiently. I found 10 elite military formations capable of channeling the strength of a 1,000-man army into a single person. I found more Taoist spells and even Confucian calligraphy. Each scroll of calligraphy contained a unique Tao rhyme and traces of righteous qi. It was a treasure trove for scholars. I stood before them, letting the system record the essence of every brushstroke. Once the progress bars finished, I finally picked up a physical book to maintain my cover. It was the Red Goat Body Breaking Technique, a powerful body-refining art. I flipped through the pages, pretending to study it intensely. In my mind, I gave the command, System, begin deduction. Infuse the technique. 5 minutes later, new text flashed on my vision. The infusion began. 5%, 35%, 78%. The process took 3 minutes, and the physical sensation was overwhelming. My skin turned searing hot. It felt like my blood and bones were being forged in a vat of molten lava. Every inch of my flesh was being hammered by a divine blacksmith, forcing out every impurity. In my mind's eye, a great sun rose. The true intent of the Sun Guardian strike I had learned earlier merged with this new body-refining art. My blood thickened, carrying a scorching heat. The air on the 5th floor began to shimmer and warp. I felt like a piece of steel fresh from the furnace. Suddenly, 2 figures blurred into existence. Xiaohong and Xiaohuang appeared right in front of me, their faces grim as they felt the sudden spike in temperature. He's mastered the Red Goat body-breaking technique. Xiaohong gasped. He grasped the true intent that quickly? They looked at me like I was a monster. They knew this technique well. It was effective even for 4th-rank masters. That's why it was kept on the 5th floor. They had been watching me wander aimlessly, but in a flash, I had achieved what took others years. I slowly opened my eyes. The golden glow faded from my pupils, and the heat radiating from my pores began to settle. My skin returned to its normal color. I looked at them, acting surprised. 4th Grandpa? 6th Grandpa? What are you doing here? I asked, tilting my head innocently. How did you learn that technique so fast? Xiaohong asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. I rubbed the back of my head, putting on my best impression of a naive, honest kid. I don't really know. I was just reading it, and suddenly, I just felt it. Xiaohong opened his mouth to speak, but went silent. He looked frustrated. Just felt it? Was it really that simple? Xiaohuang didn't say a word. He stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. I felt a surge of his qi enter my body, probing my meridians. He was suspicious, searching for any sign that I was an imposter or using some forbidden art. He did a full circuit and found nothing wrong. Instead, he found a body that was incredibly sturdy with a foundation deeper than anything he'd ever seen. His bones are still average, Xiaohuang muttered, sounding confused. He shouldn't be a martial genius, yet his foundation is terrifying. This is strange. He looked me in the eye. Why did you pick this specific book? And what were you doing earlier, just glancing at everything? I heard that the ancient sages studied every school of thought to create their own paths, I said, rubbing my hands together sheepishly. I wanted to try and follow their example, even if I'm not that capable. As for this book, it felt similar to the blade technique I learned before. It just clicked. Xiaohuang burst out laughing. He laughed until his eyes watered. You? Following the path of sages. He shook his head, trying to suppress his grin so he wouldn't discourage me. You're too young, boy. You don't have the life experience for that. Your realm is too low. If you study too many things at once, you'll ruin your focus and damage your heart. You need to pick one path and stick to it. I nodded quickly, playing the part of the obedient junior. Your talent for martial arts might be lacking, Xiao Hong added, his voice softening. But your comprehension is extraordinary. Perhaps you can still achieve something great. I thanked them and chatted for a bit longer while they gave me advice on cultivation. When I finally turned to leave the pavilion, I could hear them sighing behind me. What a waste, Xiao Hong whispered. His comprehension is God tier, but his body is a dud. Fate is cruel. Why didn't we let this boy become a scholar? If he had studied under the third brother, he could have become a great Confucian by now. He could have brought a new line of literature to the Xia family. Xiao Huang sounded just as heartbroken. Our family has been full of nothing but rough soldiers for 600 years. The court scholars always look down on us. If he had taken the scholarly path, he could have balanced our family's legacy. Xiao Hong stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. I heard that years ago, the second brother sent a letter from the eastern frontier. He told the third brother to stop teaching the boy. His son should practice martial arts. My uncle Xiao Hong's voice drifted through the silence of the hidden pavilion. Even if his body is trash, even if he's destined to bleed on the battlefield one day, he should die with a blade in his hand, not a brush. A long, heavy silence followed. I stood outside, hidden, listening to the weight of their words. Old second, Xiao Yuan. He was a good man, Xiao Huang sighed eventually. A brilliant general. He never shamed the Marquis's estate. But as a father, he failed. He failed miserably. I felt a pang in my chest. In my memories, my parents were distant, cold figures. I had grown up lonely in this massive clan, ignored by the elders who saw no martial talent in me. They didn't know that while they looked away, I was burying myself in the library, reading every scripture and classic I could find. According to the later records in the chronicles of the great founder, the world would one day realize my comprehension was godlike. They'd record how I sat in the library and mastered complex techniques in a single breath. But for now, I was just a boy trying to survive. I made my way back to my own courtyard. Night had fallen, and the moonlight felt like liquid silver on my fingertips. Today had been more eventful than my last 2 months combined. Young master, Xia Qian came running out the moment he heard me. He looked like he was about to burst with joy. The news is everywhere. The emperor has betrothed the second princess to you. Every branch of the family has been sending gifts all evening. I nodded calmly. Just take care of them for me. I didn't have time for vanity. For the next 2 days, I locked myself in my yard. I pushed my body to the limit. I watched the proficiency bars on my system panel climb higher and higher. My pure young true chi was becoming thick and potent. I used the Sun Guardian demon-breaking strike to draw in the extreme young energy from the heavens, tempering my flesh until it felt like iron. Then, I used the Red Sun body-refining art to forge my bones and circulate my internal energy. The two techniques complemented each other perfectly. My physique was undergoing a total transformation. On the third day, the peace was broken. A man knocked on my gate. It was Xia Dong, my uncle Xia Qian's right-hand man. He was a general who had given up his rank to stay by my uncle's side as a loyal follower. Third young master, he said, bowing slightly. The master requests your presence. I was shirtless, dripping with sweat, my skin glowing a dull crimson from the heat of my cultivation. As the color faded, I saw a flash of genuine surprise in Xia Dong's eyes. Uncle Dong, I said, grabbing a towel. You didn't have to come yourself. You could have sent a servant. He smiled. When it concerns the young master's future, I prefer to handle it personally. I like Xia Dong. He didn't treat me like a transparent nobody like the others did. I quickly washed up, changed into clean robes, and followed him. My heart was racing, but I kept my pace steady and my face calm. I knew why I was being summoned. My official appointment was ready. It took 20 minutes to walk across the massive estate to my uncle's quarters. Sit, Chenner, Xia Qian said, sipping his tea. He didn't waste time. You wanted to go out and gain experience. I've settled it. There are 3 positions available to you. All are solid. I smiled. Having the Marquis's estate behind me made everything easier. In my past life as a player, it took me 6 months just to get a bottom-tier rank 9 job. Now, I was looking at 3 high-level options. First, my uncle continued, the Imperial Forest Guard. Second, the Qingzhou Garrison. Third, the Southern Border Army. All are rank 7 positions. My eyes lit up. Rank 7 right out of the gate. That was the power of a noble family. I choose the Imperial Forest Guard, I said without a second of hesitation. The border army was good for merit, but I didn't need that yet. My system handled my growth speed. The Forest Guard, however, were the Emperor's personal troops. They patrolled the capital. They handled law enforcement. They controlled the gates. Most importantly, I knew what was coming. In 5 years, during the Bloody Palace coup, the Forest Guard would be the ultimate pivot of power. If I wanted to change my fate, I had to start building my influence in the heart of the capital now. Are you sure? Xiaqian asked, leaning forward. I'm sure, uncle. Good. Wait for the official word. I walked out of his study with a grin I couldn't hide. It had been 2 months since I woke up in this world. Finally, I was leaving this starter village. Capital city, here I come. As I walked, a strange thought hit me. Why did I still remember the poems, the Buddhist scriptures, and the philosophies from my old world? In the game, players had their memories of Earth's culture wiped the moment they entered. It was as if this world's laws didn't allow outside ideas to exist. But I remembered everything. Every line of verse, every ancient text. I realized then that I wasn't just a survivor. I was a walking library of a civilization this world had never seen, and I was going to use every bit of it. I was the only one left behind. In the game, every player had their memories of Earth scrubbed to protect the laws of this world. But I remembered everything. I took a deep breath and looked down at my hand. Resting there, visible only to me, was the faint, ghostly image of the Nine-Dragon Imperial Jade Seal. What exactly was this thing? It didn't just bring me into this world early. It kept my auxiliary system intact and bypassed the memory wipe. As I whispered the question to myself, the seal began to glow with a hazy, shimmering light. It was waking up. It was trying to answer me. My pupils constricted. For 2 months, I had tried everything to get a reaction out of this seal, and I had gotten nothing. Now, threads of light were bleeding out from my palm. I quickened my pace, cutting across the massive marquee estate until I reached my private courtyard. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My palm felt like it was on fire. It was a searing, throbbing heat, as if something was trying to grow out from inside my own flesh. I could feel a connection forming, a symbiotic bond. We were becoming one, rooted in the same source. Wisps of chaotic gray mist swirled within the seal. In a daze, I saw visions of ancient laws and rituals intertwining. Chains of divine order shot out, and mysterious runes crawled across the seal's surface. I saw tens of thousands of living beings prostrating on the ground. Fires roared. In the center of a territory spanning millions of miles stood a massive sacrificial altar built from 5-colored chaotic stone. A sound pierced through the heavens, the sound of an ancient ritual. It felt like it was calling my name. My head spun, my ears rang, and goosebumps erupted across my skin. Then, the phantom seal in my hand began to turn solid. It was manifesting into reality, descending into this world from some unknown void. I couldn't help myself. I walked toward the seal as it floated in the middle of my room, radiating a thick purple mist. The next second, the world blinked. I was sucked inside. Outside, the room was silent. Even in a house full of top-tier martial experts, not a single soul noticed I was gone. I steadied my mind and looked around. I was in a strange, frozen world. Everything was locked in a deathly silence, covered in ice. The only place with a spark of life was the small area directly around me. I was standing on top of that same 5-colored sacrificial altar. Items were laid out before me. There was a prehistoric beast larger than a mountain, its blood still dripping as if it had just been hunted. There was a chunk of chaotic jade marrow pulsing with energy. There was a scroll of the red gold phoenix scripture. And then, my eyes landed on something else. Was that a phoenix egg? I had never seen these things before, yet the information flooded my brain automatically. Further off, floating in the void, was another egg radiating intense life force, as if it were undergoing nirvana. Near it sat a second egg that seemed to resonate with the first. A dragon egg. I couldn't keep my heart from racing. Pure-blooded dragons and phoenixes were supposed to be extinct. In the era of spiritual recovery, a person could become a legend just by finding a few drops of their blood. But here they were, right in front of me, still alive. Who were these offerings for? Who could possibly be worthy of sacrificing pure-blooded divine beasts and chaotic treasures? Was it for the heavens? No. I looked around and realized the truth. I wasn't looking up at the sky. I was standing above it. I was sitting atop the ninth heaven. Around me was a vast complex of palaces built from the stars themselves, spanning across the cosmos. In this moment, I felt like the god of this place. My vision expanded until I could see the entire world. I had been granted some kind of authority. I tried to step closer to the offerings, but an invisible barrier shoved me back. I tried again and again, but the barrier wouldn't budge. I finally gave up. I hadn't unlocked full access yet. Was it because I didn't have the recognition of this place, or were my stats just too low? I pushed the thought aside and looked at the ruins. This was the heavenly court. It was a celestial nest that had once ruled over everything, but for some reason, it had fallen. Everything was frozen. I saw rows of heavenly soldiers trapped in ice. I saw the names on the palaces, the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the Ministry of War, the Medicine Hall, the Hamlin Academy, and the demon-slaying platform. Inside those halls stood figures radiating terrifying power, all frozen in time. Their lives had dimmed, but inside each of them, a crystal pulsed with the laws of the great Tao. Suddenly, a dragon's roar shattered the silence. My pupils shrank as a golden dragon, so long it spanned across provinces, erupted from the purple cloud palace. It was a dragon of fortune, but it looked terrible. Its light was fading, its body turning translucent. It was about to vanish from existence forever. The dragon's eyes were full of intelligence. When it saw me, a look of pure joy flashed in its gaze. In the blink of an eye, it was hovering directly over my head. Before I could even react, it dived straight into my forehead. I felt like I was going to explode. A massive wave of energy flooded my body, shattering my meridians instantly. But right behind the destruction came a surge of life. My flesh, which was being obliterated inch by inch, began to regrow just as fast. Death and rebirth cycled over and over, clashing and merging until my body became a vessel for a strange, new balance. Then, my eyes began to burn. My saint pupils, the legendary trait I had only caught glimpses of, began to fully manifest. My black gold eyes mutated. 2 pupils appeared in each socket, one yin and one yang, like the sun and moon merging. Purple gold energy swirled in my vision as the golden dragon fused with my sight. The saint pupils were a myth, a sign of the ancient sage emperors. It was said that anyone born with them carried the destiny of a saint. As long as they didn't die young, they were guaranteed to rule the heavens. And now, mine were waking up. I don't know how long the process took. When I finally came to, my body felt like it had been forged from diamond. I was different, inside and out. That golden dragon was the condensed fortune of this ruined heavenly court, and now it lived inside me. In this world, empires fought over fortune. They used it to appoint gods and fuel their cultivation. The entire struggle for power in the coming years was really just a war for fortune. Only a true emperor could carry the golden dragon of fortune, and I had just swallowed one. I closed my eyes and began to inspect the power flowing through my veins. I was no longer just a player or a survivor. I was the master of a fallen heaven. The golden dragon of fortune had vanished without a trace, as if it had never existed at all. I searched for it within my consciousness, but it was gone. Instead, I felt my essence, energy, and spirit reach a peak I had never known. My state was better than ever. My skeletal structure had been completely reshaped. I muttered to myself in disbelief as I realized I had broken through to the 7th rank, the spirit refining realm. Even with my support system allowing me to level up through simple proficiency, having a body that was no longer considered martial trash changed everything. The massive surge of energy that had nearly obliterated me earlier had been a double-edged sword. It brought destruction, yes, but it also carried a dense, vibrant life force that allowed my body to undergo a true nirvana. I stood in the center of the altar, calming my racing heart, and began to walk forward. Ahead of me sat the Lingxiao Palace. I walked for what felt like an eternity. Time seemed to lose all meaning in this place. Was it a day? A month? A year? It felt like a century had passed, even though the palace didn't look that far away. It was as if I were crossing through endless layers of space. Finally, I stepped inside the Zixiao Palace. My breath hitched. Massive gods stood there, their bodies larger than mountains. Their gazes looked capable of piercing the 9 levels of the underworld, and their mere presence felt like it could crush rivers and mountains. But they were all frozen. Their heads were bowed, prostrating toward the front, as if they had exhausted every drop of their life force in a final act of worship. Within their chest bones, I saw mysterious crystals forming. The shock hit me hard. The 9-dragon jade seal in the palm of my hand was far more significant than I had imagined. It didn't just contain power. It seemed to house an entire ruined ancient heavenly court. I followed the direction of the god's worship and saw a towering figure. The stars of the heavens swirled around him. 9 true dragons draped across his arms like mere ornaments. He stood there silently, but the aura of an ultimate emperor radiated from him, a presence that demanded the submission of all worlds. Then I saw his eyes. My heart shook. As I looked at him, the chaotic mist covering his face drifted away. I was instantly captivated. He had saint pupils. At that moment, the saint pupils in my own eyes reacted. They began to resonate with the emperor's eyes, calling out to one another like kin recognizing kin. A beam of purple gold light shot out from the emperor's gaze. Not again, I thought. I instinctively tried to retreat, remembering how the golden dragon had forced its way into me. But my body was locked. The entire world seemed to wake up, the very laws of the universe roaring in my ears. The purple gold light slammed into my mind, and a mountain of information exploded in my brain. I let out a muffled groan, my vision went black, and I collapsed. When I finally woke up, a faint light was breaking over the horizon. The darkness over the capital was fading, and the sun was returning to the world. I checked the stone clock in my room, a specialized tool from the Celestial Master's mansion. Only one night had passed. I inspected my body. My spirit felt drained, but my physical blood and energy were at their absolute peak. It wasn't a dream. I was officially in the 7th rank. I looked at the palm of my hand and saw the jade seal totem glowing faintly, as if celebrating that it was no longer covered in dust. I felt a deep, soul-bound connection to it now. I tried to recall the details of the ruined heavenly court, but a sharp, needle-like pain stabbed through my brain. A title appeared in my mind, the Grand Genesis Earthly Jade Heaven Scripture. I tried to read the technique, but it was shrouded in a thick, chaotic mist. I couldn't access it. Was it because the spiritual chi recovery hadn't fully begun yet? Or was it because I hadn't established a dynasty of fortune to gather the necessary energy? I didn't know. I decided not to force it. If the technique was in my head, the timing just wasn't right yet. I spent the rest of the day meditating. The breakthrough and the inheritance had taken a massive toll on me. I realized I was still too weak. My body and spirit couldn't yet carry the full weight of that ancient power, let alone practice its techniques. By the time I opened my eyes again, it was afternoon. My color had returned, and I felt strong. I stepped into the courtyard and began practicing my strikes. My fists whistled through the air, creating small sonic booms. The difference between the 7th and 8th rank was night and day. In this era, a 7th rank fighter was a true expert. In the military, I could lead 1,000 men. In the martial world, I'd be considered a master. Young master, your appointment papers are here. Xia Qian came running into the courtyard, holding a scroll and a set of armor sent over by the Imperial Guard. I stopped my training and took the documents. These were official orders from the Ministry of War. I was no longer just a commoner. I was officially entering the political arena as a 7th rank commandant. Being the legal son of a marquis certainly had its perks. In my past life, people spent decades of blood and sweat to reach this rank. For me, it was handed over because of 600 years of my family's glory and the sacrifices of my ancestors. When do you start, young master? Xia Qian asked, his eyes gleaming. Tomorrow, I said firmly. I had been waiting for this for 2 months. So soon? Young master, I want to go with you. Xia Qian was talented. He had broken into the 8th rank a month ago and was dying to see the world outside the estate. I nodded. Pack your things. You're coming with me. In the Great Wu dynasty, it was an unwritten rule that noble sons could bring personal retainers to their posts. It helped them maintain control over rowdy soldiers and kept them safe on the battlefield. The civil officials never complained because the alternative was sending their own sons to the front lines to fight barbarians and demons. At dawn the next day, I woke up early. It was time. I threw on my official military robes and stepped out of my courtyard. Xiaqian was already waiting at the gate. Behind him stood 3 men with powerful auras and blood-thick energy. They weren't ordinary servants. They reeked of the battlefield. "Young master." The 4 of them greeted me in unison. I looked at the horizon. My journey into the military was finally beginning. I wasn't surprised to see the 3 men standing behind Xiaqian. They were retainers of the Marquis' estate. Every highborn son of our house was assigned a few of these experts when they entered the world. They served as bodyguards, but more importantly, they were the foundation. They were the muscle that helped a young noble quickly seize control of a military unit. "Let's go," I said. I didn't waste words. The 5 of us moved silently through the estate and slipped out of the side gate. The Marquis' residence stood at the very heart of the capital, looming close to the imperial palace. The moment we stepped out, we were on Central Avenue. This road had been built 800 years ago when the dynasty was founded. Calling it a street didn't do it justice. It was more like a massive plaza, wide enough for 12 carriages to drive abreast. Even in the early dawn, the city was alive. Vendors lined the sides of the road, shouting for business. Pedestrians and carriages flowed like a river. As the sun climbed higher, the great capital began to hum like a massive, well-oiled machine. I stopped at a roadside stall with Xiaqian and the others for a quick breakfast. Once finished, we headed straight for the Yulin Guard headquarters. Because the Yulin Guard was responsible for the capital's security and served as the emperor's personal escort, they weren't stationed outside the city. They had a permanent, grand office right in the inner city. "Halt! Who goes there?" I reached the gates of a magnificent building near the palace. A group of fully armed soldiers in heavy armor stepped forward to block my path. Their tone was firm, but they remained respectful. "Xiaqian, I'm here to take my post," I replied. I didn't play games. I had no interest in hiding my identity just to play the hidden master and slap someone's face later. I was here to get to work. "Commandant Xia." The soldiers snapped to attention immediately. They offered a crisp military salute. Word had already spread. A new commandant had been dropped into the Yulin Guard from above, and his background was terrifying. He was the legal son of the Marquis of Anong. I nodded, keeping my expression cold and stern. I wanted to project an aura of someone who wasn't to be trifled with. "Lord Commandant, let me lead the way," a small squad leader said, scurrying to my side. He bowed low, his face plastered with a humble, fawning smile. He personally escorted me through the gates. As soon as we disappeared inside, the remaining soldiers let out a collective breath. They started whispering instantly. "My God, since when does our leader smile like that?" His face was practically folding into wrinkles. The Yulin Guard had brutal selection standards. Most were minor nobles, sons of war heroes, or the most ferocious warriors pulled from other camps. Being the emperor's personal troops gave them a lot of pride. They saw generals every day. Usually, they'd be polite to a new commandant, but they'd never be this subservient. "Are you kidding?" another soldier hissed. "Do you know who that is?" "Sure, they say he's a martial arts failure, but look at his family. Having him dropped into our unit, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. Whatever. The Yulin Guard is full of hidden dragons and arrogant noble brats. He's just one more son of a marquis. Let's just watch the show." The squad leader, Li Shi, led me toward the back of the complex. The backyard was actually a massive, open-air training ground that felt like a full military camp. Squads were already out there, drilling in the morning heat. "Where are my men?" I asked calmly. I needed a guide in this place, and this Li Shi seemed to have sharp eyes. "The commandant's unit is over there," Li Shi said. He gritted his teeth, looking hesitant. I frowned, but Li Shi wouldn't say another word. "Lord Commandant, you'll see for yourself once you get there." I didn't press him. I simply turned and walked toward the back right corner of the camp. As I drew closer, the sound of raucous laughter drifted over the walls. "Haha, I won again. Lunch is on me today, brothers. We're going to Deshun restaurant." I stood outside a large tent. I heard the distinct clack-clack of tiles and more cheering. They were gambling. This world had its own version of card and tile games, And while it was a common hobby, it was strictly forbidden in the military, especially when money was involved. I didn't let any emotion show on my face. Li Shi, who was watching me from the side, felt a chill. He couldn't read me at all. He knew exactly what was happening in that tent and had expected me to explode in rage. Seeing me so calm made him think I lacked spirit. He figured I was just another spoiled brat who got lucky with my birth. "I'll go scream at them," Xia Qian growled behind me. He was fuming. Every other unit was training, and his master's men were gambling in broad daylight. "I'll do it," I said, stopping him. My eyes pierced through the thick fabric of the tent. Ever since I woke up this morning, I had noticed a change in my vision. I could capture things others couldn't. Seeing through a thin layer of cloth was easy now. I reached out and yanked the tent flap open. A gust of cold morning air rushed in, startling the two soldiers lounging by the entrance. They jumped, looking annoyed. When they saw a stranger standing there, they barked at me. "Who the hell are you? How dare you barge into a military camp?" They were half asleep and didn't recognize me. Their shouting drew everyone's attention. The men huddled around the gambling pile stood up. "Xia Chun," I said, my voice flat and steady. "Who's in charge here?" The tent went dead silent. A few men realized who I was and looked panicked, frantically stuffing gambling tiles into their armor. But others didn't seem to care. One man even smirked, showing zero respect. "Ah, so it's young Master Xia. You're certainly in a hurry. The appointment only came down yesterday, and here you are already." The voice was dripping with sarcasm. A burly young man stood up from the center of the crowd. He tossed a tile casually in his hand and looked me up and down with a provocative grin. This was Zhao Yu, a captain in the Yulin Guard and the third son of the Marquis of Jinwu. He was my direct subordinate. I had already memorized the files on my officers that my estate sent me yesterday. Zhao Yu was the one they warned me about. I knew why he hated me. I had stolen his spot. If I hadn't been dropped in as commandant, that promotion would have been his. He had already bragged to his men that he'd be their new boss. Then, in 3 days, everything changed. Zhao Yu wasn't going to take it lying down. He had spent the last 24 hours leading a mini-rebellion, telling the men to skip drills and gamble instead. He wanted to give me a welcome gift to show me who really ran this unit. He probably thought it would take me a few more days to work up the courage to show up. He was wrong. I didn't expect to start my new job so soon, but here I was on my second day, standing in the middle of the camp. Zhao Yu's eyes were practically spitting fire at me. He looked at my uniform like I'd stolen it off his own back. In his mind, he was the one who deserved to wear it. To him, I was just a famous piece of trash who had snatched his promotion. "Do you know the penalty for gambling in the barracks?" I asked. I ignored his glare and spoke directly. "Yeah, I was an outsider dropped into this position by royal decree. But so was he. He had used his family name to skip the line and take a command position just like everyone else. People hate privilege until they have it. My family had spent 600 years bleeding for this country. If the Xia family had more pull than the Zhao family, it was because we had paid for it in gold and bone. We are just having some fun in our off hours," Zhao Yu sneered. "Does young Master Xia have a problem with that?" He looked at me with total contempt. I narrowed my eyes and stepped closer. "In this camp, you address me by my rank," I said. My voice was calm, but I let my presence weigh heavy on the room. I saw the flicker of confusion and fear in his eyes. He felt a pressure he usually only felt around his father or the high lords of the court. He turned red, clearly ashamed that a waste like me could make him flinch for even a second. "What's the matter, Commandant?" He spat. "Are you trying to act tough on your first day?" He wasn't going to back down. His family had warned him to stay quiet, but his ego wouldn't let him. He knew my father, the Marquis of Anong, didn't care about me. The whole city knew I was the ignored eldest son. He thought I was still that weakling everyone laughed at. He wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone to show the men I had no real power. A crowd of soldiers had already gathered outside the tent. They were whispering and peeking through the flaps, waiting for the show. In the center of the camp, 2 high-ranking officers were watching the scene while drinking tea. One of them, a man named Qin Mu, looked worried. He asked if they should intervene since I was the future son-in-law of the emperor. But the other man, General Li Wenzhong, just shook his head. He knew this was a test. If I couldn't handle my own men, I was useless to the throne. He also knew that eyes much higher than theirs were watching my every move. Disrespecting a superior, inciting a riot, and gambling in camp, I said. My voice carried through the tent, reaching every ear outside. The penalty is 100 strikes of the military cane and immediate expulsion from the guard. Anyone who stands in my way will be treated as an accomplice. Zhao Yu threw his head back and laughed. You're going to punish me? He signaled his men, and they stepped up behind him to form a wall of steel. I didn't wait for them to move. My blood began to boil, turning thick and hot in my veins. A phantom sun began to glow behind me, radiating intense heat that made the air shimmer. I reached for the hilt of my crimson blade and drew it in one fluid motion. The air screamed as I swung. Zhao Yu's eyes went wide. He felt the killing intent and the raw power of the strike. He desperately raised his own sword, pouring every bit of his energy into a block. He couldn't understand how a failure like me could move with such speed. The collision sent a shower of sparks flying. Zhao Yu's face went from arrogant to terrified in a split second. A massive wave of solar energy slammed into his blade and shattered his defense. He coughed up a spray of bright red blood and went airborne. He crashed through the tent wall and landed hard on a soldier who had been eavesdropping outside. The entire camp went dead silent. Nobody moved. Zhao Yu lay there on the dirt, limp and bleeding from the mouth. He was at the peak of the 8th rank, a talented fighter from a noble house, and I had taken him down in a single blow. The soldiers who had been laughing moments ago were now paralyzed with fear. Li Shi, the man who had led me into the camp, stared at me with wide eyes. He realized the rumors were wrong. The famous waist of the Xia family was gone. In his place stood a man who was truly dangerous. It wasn't just the soldiers who were stunned. Even Xia Qian and the men standing behind me had looks of pure shock in their eyes. Xia Qian could feel it. I had changed too much in too little time. My thoughts were impossible to read, and my strength had reached a level he couldn't explain. I didn't give them time to process it. I slowly slid my crimson blade back into its sheath with a cold, metallic click. I reached out and pulled back the heavy curtain of the command tent. The midday sun poured over me. I felt like I was bathing in a sea of liquid gold, standing there with a weight of authority that felt divine. Every soldier in the camp stopped to stare. Even in my heavy armor, they could see I wasn't just another noble brat. My aura was sharp, regal, and dangerous. I walked toward Zhao Yu. He was slumped on the ground, his face a ghostly shade of white. He tried to lift his arms to ward me off, but they were useless. I had shattered the bones in both his limbs with that single strike. 3 of his personal guards scrambled to stand between us, trembling as they faced me. They were houseborn soldiers from the Zhao family, loyal to him above the law. I didn't even look at them. I turned my gaze to the rest of the camp. My voice wasn't loud, but it rippled through the air like a heavy stone dropped into a still pond. Where's the Jiazi camp? The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. Then, the first few began to move. One by one, they scrambled to the open ground to form a line. The ones who had been hesitating saw Zhao Yu bleeding in the dirt and quickly decided where their loyalties lay. Within seconds, 98 men stood in a perfect, silent formation. I looked at the line. Where's the disciplinary team? 5 men stepped forward with crisp, disciplined movements. They had seen me take down a marquis's son without blinking. They weren't about to test me. I pointed at the man on the ground. Take him away. Give him 100 strikes of the military pole. Then, tell the Marquis of Jinwu to come pick up his trash. As of today, Zhao Yu is expelled from the Jin army. My voice was cold and empty of emotion. A collective shiver ran through the crowd. Expelled? Li Zheng, the leader of the disciplinary team, stammered the word out like he couldn't believe his ears. I turned my eyes on him. I didn't say a word, but he flinched like he was being stared down by a prehistoric beast. He felt a pressure coming off me that was heavier than anything he'd felt from the high ministers at court. He nodded frantically and signaled his men. You have no right. Zhao Yu screamed. He coughed up another spray of blood, his eyes turning a frantic, bloodshot red. If he was kicked out of the army like this, he wouldn't just lose his rank. He would lose his face. His entire family would become the laughingstock of the capital's elite. I ignored his howling. He was a fool. He had been gambling in a military camp and openly provoked a superior officer. He had handed me the knife I needed to make an example of him, and I wasn't going to waste it. Li Zheng and his men grabbed Zhao Yu. His personal guards tried to draw their weapons to stop them, but Xia Qian and my men moved faster. They disarmed the guards in a blur of motion, snapping their blades and pinning them down. My men had been waiting for a chance to show their worth, and they didn't disappoint. The camp watched in dead silence as Zhao Yu was dragged away. A moment later, his agonizing screams began to echo from the distance. Every soldier there felt their scalp go numb. They realized then that I didn't care about his background or his father's title. If I could do this to him, I could do much worse to them. I had taken total control of the camp in minutes, cutting through the chaos like a hot blade through wax. High above the camp, two men were watching from a balcony. Qin Mu, a man with a stern, square face, nodded in approval. He liked what he saw. I had moved fast, hit hard, and established my authority without a second of hesitation. Next to him, Li Wenzhong, the general of the Yulin Guard, sipped his tea with a calm expression. He noted that I seemed to understand military strategy well enough to use Zhao Yu as a stepping stone. Li Wenzhong wasn't entirely happy, though. He grumbled about me not coming to see him first, but he knew my status. I was the son of the Marquis of Anong and the future husband of the princess. I wasn't a normal subordinate. He told Qin Mu to bring me to see him once I finished settling the camp, but he made sure to tell him to be respectful. He knew the emperor's eyes were likely watching this very camp, waiting to see how I handled my new life. I followed Qin Mu as he led me through the heart of the camp toward the general's headquarters. He was a Due, my direct superior in charge of 1,000 men, but he treated me with a strange politeness. I understood why. In this world, power and connections were everything. He explained the structure to me as we walked. The Yulin Guard had 3,000 men under the general. Below him were 3 Due, and below them were the Shaowei like me. I was in charge of 2 camps, including the one I had just purged. You really should have reported to the general first, Qin Mu said softly. It's the proper way to start your first day. He looked at me, and I noticed his tone was much warmer than it had been before. I nodded, but my mind was racing. I realized then that the guards at the gate had led me straight to the camp on purpose. They hadn't taken me to the general. They had dropped me right into the middle of a trap, hoping Zhao Yu would break me. I narrowed my eyes as we reached the general's tent. The game was much deeper than I thought. I knew then that I had been set up. Everything, the directions at the gate, the timing, the confrontation, had been calculated to test me. While I was lost in thought, a soldier stepped out from the massive, sprawling general's tent. He bowed and told me the general was ready to see me. I nodded, keeping my expression calm and composed, and walked inside. A middle-aged officer sat behind a desk. I immediately cupped my hands and gave him a formal military salute. In the army, rank is everything. Even if you have a powerful family, you save that talk for private. If a subordinate disrespects a superior here, it's a capital crime. That was exactly why I felt so comfortable kicking Zhao Yu out earlier. He had broken the most fundamental rule of the camp, and even if the news spread, he was the one in the wrong. No need for such formalities, Li Wenzhong said with a chuckle. He gestured for me to sit, and personally poured me a cup of tea. He told me he just wanted to meet me and get to know the man everyone was talking about. He didn't act like a superior at all. He told me that since we were both from families of the 5 honors, we were practically kin. He explained that his family owed a great debt to the Marquis of Anong. 200 years ago, his ancestor served as a vanguard under the previous Marquis and earned a title through his military exploits. Even though his family's title wasn't hereditary, it got them into the inner circle of the elite. It was the reason he was sitting in this command chair today. If you don't mind, Li Wenzhong said, looking me in the eye, you can just call me Uncle Shu Shu. Of course, Uncle Shu Shu, I replied without a second of hesitation. On the outside, I was smiling, but my mind was working at lightning speed. I remembered the files my uncle Xia Qian had given me. The Li family had been fading for generations. They were on the verge of disappearing from history until Li Wenzhong suddenly rose through the ranks of the Imperial Guard like a shooting star. He was the emperor's man. My uncle's notes didn't say it explicitly, but it was obvious. You don't get promoted that fast in the Imperial Guard unless the emperor personally trusts you. Seeing how well he treated me, I realized my status as the future prince consort was even more valuable than I thought. In the Imperial Guard, I wasn't just an officer. I was practically part of the family that owned the place. As long as the Emperor hadn't turned against me yet, these men wouldn't dare offend me. I relaxed and leaned into the conversation. By the time I left his tent, we were chatting like old friends. The start of this journey was going much better than I expected. The amount of power I could seize here was far greater than I had initially hoped. When I got back to my own camp, Xia Qian ran over, looking worried. "Young master, did General Li give you a hard time?" "Call me by my rank in the camp," I said, waving him off. "And no, we had a great talk." I briefed Xia Qian and the 3 experts who had come with me, Xia Hui, Xia Xiao, and Xia Kong. They were all battle-hardened veterans. Xia Hui, in particular, was at the 7th rank, the spirit-refining realm. In any other unit, he'd be a high-ranking officer himself. As we were talking, a voice came from outside the tent. "Subordinate Qian Nan requests an audience with the captain." I let him in. Qian Nan was my other lieutenant, the one who hadn't been there for the morning's execution. He walked in and immediately performed a deep, respectful salute, his voice trembling as he pledged his loyalty. He had clearly heard what happened to Zhao Yu. I sat there and stared at him in silence. I didn't say a word. I watched the sweat bead on his forehead. He looked like he was facing a firing squad. Zhao Yu had actually approached him yesterday, suggesting they team up to give me a welcome I wouldn't forget. Qian Nan was only alive because he had been out on patrol this morning. He knew he had dodged a bullet. "Stand up," I said finally. Qian Nan exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. He looked at me with genuine awe. He later told me that in that moment of silence, I felt more terrifying than the general himself. He realized then that a true heir of the Marquis's house was not someone to be trifled with. I asked him about the patrol. He reported that everything was quiet, aside from a small theft he had handled. Then he mentioned something that caught my attention. "The capital is getting restless, sir. Spies from the Great Qi dynasty are popping up. We've been ordered to assist the lantern bearers in rooting them out." The lantern bearers. They were a specialized organization that answered only to the emperor, much like the secret police from my old world's history. They stood outside the normal government hierarchy. I nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. Even though the Imperial Guard was powerful, we were mostly muscle. When it came to real intelligence and shadow work, the emperor trusted the lanterns first. By noon, I decided it was time to solidify my position. I invited all my fellow officers and subordinates to a feast at the famous Tongfu Inn. To my satisfaction, every single one of them accepted. In this world, a meal was never just about the food. It was about who was standing behind you. Every officer and soldier who wasn't on active duty showed up at Tongfu Inn. The place was packed. Even Li Wenzhong and Qin Mu made an appearance, which sent a ripple of shock through my subordinates. In the capital, everyone is a social climber. They knew exactly what their presence meant. Suddenly, my fellow officers were a lot more respectful. They kept raising their glasses to me, their smiles wider and more genuine than before. While I was enjoying my moment in the sun, the Jinwu Marquis' estate was in complete chaos. "Young master, what happened?" The guards at the gate saw Zhao Yu being carried back by his followers from a distance. He looked like a corpse. His arms hung limp and broken at his sides. His entire back was a bloody, mangled mess. He had long since passed out from the pain. The guards turned pale when they saw his condition. If Zhao Yu hadn't been a trained martial artist, those wounds would have killed him twice over. The peaceful estate turned into a hornet's nest. Servants scrambled in every direction. Someone was sent sprinting to the East City to fetch the best doctor from Xuanji Clinic. My son, my poor son. The Marchioness, Zhao Yu's mother, rushed into the room. She shrieked when she saw him lying motionless on the bed. "Who did this?" she screamed, turning on the men who brought him home. "Who dared to be so cruel? Do they have no respect for the house of the Jinwu Marquis?" She started sobbing as she spoke. He had left this morning perfectly fine. Now he was being carried back on a stretcher. "Was it a foreign spy?" she wailed. The followers dropped to their knees, trembling. They told her everything. They didn't leave out a single detail. That boy, how could he be so ruthless to a fellow officer? The Marchioness's eyes turned murderous. "We are all part of the same military circle. He has no sense of loyalty. I'll have my husband file a formal complaint against him immediately. She was livid. First, the boy broke her son's arms. Then, he ordered 100 strikes with a military staff. And finally, he kicked him out of the Imperial Guard. It was an insult she couldn't stomach. Enough. A middle-aged man walked into the room. It was Zhao Yu, the Jinwu Marquis. He looked at his fuming wife with a flicker of annoyance. "Husband, you have to do something," she cried, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the bed. "That little brat tried to ruin our son." Zhao Yu looked at his son's broken body. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't lose his cool. "He brought this on himself," the Marquis said coldly. "I brought him into my study yesterday and explained the situation. I told him not to pick a fight with the Xiao boy. The kid is his direct superior now. It was always going to be easy for him to find an excuse to crush Zhao Yu." He sighed, his voice filled with frustration. "I told him I'd arrange a better position for him in a few weeks. But this idiot couldn't wait. He had to pick a fight. And even then, he was so clumsy about it. He has no brains." Zhao Yu was genuinely angry. Compared to his two older brothers, his youngest son was a disaster in terms of both intelligence and ability. He sometimes wondered if the boy was even his. Despite being the son of a marquis, Zhao Yu was still stuck as a lowly captain in his 20s because he was just that incompetent. The Marchioness blanched at her husband's harsh words, but she wasn't ready to give up. "You was the one who started it, fine. But we're all on the same side. If there's a problem, they should sit down and talk. Why be so violent? If you wasn't an 8th-rank martial artist, those 100 strikes would have killed him." A flash of hidden rage crossed the Marquis's face, but he suppressed it. "Military matters aren't like tea parties. The boy just took office. My son led a group to humiliate him on his very first day. If he didn't use Zhao Yu to establish his authority, how could he ever lead the Imperial Guard? The moment that fool decided to cause a scene, there was no way this would end well." The Marquis knew how the army worked. He had led troops himself. He was disappointed. The strategy was just too crude. If it were him, he would never have challenged a superior openly on day one. He would have waited, stayed in the shadows, and tripped the kid up later. "So we just let it go," the Marchioness snapped. "He kicked him out of the guard. Does a small-time colonel even have that kind of power?" "Enough," the Marquis repeated. "I have my own plans. He might not have the official power to expel him, but your son was stupid enough to give him every legal reason to do it. If I report this higher up, the result will be the same. For now, stay quiet. Do not send anyone after him. His situation is very delicate. The Emperor himself might be watching him. Do you understand?" The Marchioness looked reluctant, but she nodded. The Marquis sighed. His older sons took after him, but it seemed the youngest had inherited all of his mother's wisdom, which was to say, none at all. Meanwhile, in the back gardens of Princess Yaoguang's palace, a beautiful figure stood by a pond, watching the ripples on the water. Lotus leaves floated peacefully, and pink and white flowers stood tall, like shy dancers. Goldfish darted between the stems. It was a perfect, silent painting. Then, a girl in yellow robes came rushing in, breaking the silence. "Princess, I just got news about Xiachun. Do you want to hear it? He started his new job today, didn't he?" The princess didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the lotuses. The girl in yellow, Li Wei, gasped. "How did you know?" "I haven't said anything yet." Li Wei was one of the princess's personal maids. She knew the princess usually stayed within the estate and rarely paid attention to the gossip about the waste of the Marquis's house. "The Marquis of Jindong has been pulling strings for a position for days," the princess said, her voice cool and calm. "I heard it was the Imperial Guard. It wasn't hard to guess." "You're so amazing, princess," Li Wei chirped. She truly admired her mistress. "You should spend more time with Ziyu," the princess said, shaking her head. "Read more books. There is wisdom in them." "Books make me sleepy," Li Wei laughed, skipping over to the princess's side. "Ziyu likes reading. I like food. Food is much better." She leaned in closer, a playful blush on her face. "Princess, don't you want to hear more? This is your future husband we're talking about." According to tradition, when the princess married, her personal maids would also serve the groom. Li Wei was already thinking ahead. "I'm not interested," the princess said. She looked at her maid with a faint, teasing smile, but deep down, She really wasn't curious about the man the world called a failure. Princess, how can you be like that? Li Wei pouted. I'm going to tell you anyway, Li Wei said, a playful pout on her lips. She grabbed the princess's arm and quickly recounted everything that had happened with me at the Imperial Guard barracks. As the princess listened, her calm expression finally flickered. He disabled Zhao Yu's arms in a single move? Yes, they said he was incredibly fierce. Li Wei nodded vigorously, her eyes wide with excitement. He faced an entire camp alone, and not a single person dared to step forward. They were all terrified. Did his family's guards help him? The princess asked. No, he did it all himself, Li Wei replied. The princess fell silent, her gaze turning thoughtful. Li Wei might have been a bit of a scatterbrain, but she wasn't stupid. She saw the look on her mistress's face and grew curious. Princess, is something wrong? For 600 years, the Marquis of Jindong's estate has had a rule, the princess said slowly. No descendant can join the military until they reach the 8th rank, the essence refining realm. The fact that Xia Chun was allowed out means he reached that rank. But he was supposed to be a martial arts failure. She paused, her brow furrowing. I thought perhaps the Marquis used expensive medicinal herbs to force his breakthrough, but even then, a forced rank doesn't grant that kind of power. His actual combat strength must be at the 7th rank, the spirit refining realm. You can buy a rank with medicine, but you can't buy talent. Maybe he ate some kind of god-tier pill? Li Wei suggested, her eyes sparkling. There is no such pill, the princess muttered. Is the Xia family hiding something? She began to wonder. Every rumor about my trash status had come from within the Xia family itself. No one on the outside had actually met me. Was it a deliberate lie? But why hide a genius? The Xia family already had several famous young talents in this generation. One more wouldn't hurt. It didn't make sense. Keep an eye on Xia Chun, the princess commanded. Report everything to me. She looked over and saw Li Wei already licking a candied hawthorn stick she had pulled from somewhere. The princess couldn't help but laugh and shake her head. I'll keep watching, Li Wei chirped, pulling a second stick from her sleeve. Princess, do you want one? There's so much good food outside the palace. Life out here is way more fun. She shoved the snack into the princess's hand. 15 minutes later, the cold, elegant princess was walking through her garden, licking the candied fruit. It was surprisingly sweet. A small smile touched her lips. Meanwhile, my afternoon was much less relaxing. I spent my time summoning both camps under my command to memorize every single face. By the end of the day, I knew all 200 of them. It seemed like a small task, but in a world of betrayal, knowing exactly who follows you is everything. I appointed my cousin, Xia Hui, to lead the first camp. He was already at the 7th rank and had previously served as a commander of over 1,000 men at the border. Handling 100 men was easy for him. Even though my appointment bypassed the usual red tape, the commander, Li Wenzhong, didn't object. He was happy to do me a favor. He knew Xia Hui was only here temporarily. If I ever left the Imperial Guard, Xia Hui would follow me without a second thought. That night, I returned home. I was supposed to be on patrol, but my camps had already finished their rotation for the week. Since I couldn't go out to the taverns to listen to music and gather info, I stayed in my room. Young master, Xia Qian's voice called from outside. Come in, I said. He entered with a stack of documents. These are the internal files on the great Qin spies you asked for. Since you're now a captain in the Yulin Guard, you have the authority to see them. I began to read. The capital had been in a state of unrest lately, and the emperor was furious. The lantern bearers, the emperor's secret police, had been making mass arrests. I flipped the page, and my blood ran cold. The defense maps for the northwest border had been stolen. The Great Wu Empire shared a border with the Great Qin and Great Feng nations. 20,000 troops were stationed there. If those maps reached the enemy, it would be a catastrophe. No wonder the emperor was losing his mind. The maps were stolen directly from the Ministry of War without anyone noticing. I whispered to myself. There's a mole inside. For decades, our three nations had been locked in a stalemate, but the theft of these maps signaled a coming storm. Great Feng had likely recovered its strength since the last big war 36 years ago. They were getting closer to Great Qin, forming an alliance against us. I kept reading. The file stated that a low-level clerk named E had stolen the maps and passed them to a blacksmith in the western city. By the time the lantern bearers arrived, both men had already committed suicide. The trail went cold. It had been 6 or 7 days. Those maps were likely already across the border. I leaned back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Something was wrong with the report. A low-level clerk couldn't have bypassed the core security of the Ministry of War alone. Furthermore, the clerk lived in the northern city, while the blacksmith lived 20 miles away in the western district. The theft happened at night during a strict curfew. Unless they had special transit passes, neither man could have walked that distance. There had to be a middleman, someone with enough power to move freely at night. Why wasn't the middleman mentioned in the file? Was it an oversight, or was someone in the secret police intentionally hiding the truth? I lay there in the dark, realizing the conspiracy went much deeper than a simple theft. The only people allowed to move freely at night were the Imperial Guard and the lantern bearers. That meant both groups were suspects. Even worse, it suggested that both organizations had been deeply infiltrated. I sat there, peeling back the layers of the mystery, but my information was too limited. I could only deduce so much from a single file. I suspected this report was incomplete. The lantern bearers were professionals. Whether they were investigating a crime or gathering intelligence, they always knew more than they let on. Unfortunately, I didn't have the authority to demand their internal files. Even if I showed up at their door, the Yulin Guard was only there to assist. In their eyes, we were nothing more than hired muscle. It was common knowledge that the Yulin Guard sucked at detective work. Usually, we just waited for the big shots to finish the investigation so we could show up at the very end to kick down doors and make arrests. Because of that, neither the lantern bearers nor the Ministry of Justice ever told us more than they absolutely had to. With those heavy thoughts swirling in my head, I finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I arrived early at the Yulin Guard Yamen. As soon as I stepped into the backyard barracks, I ran into Li Shi, the man who had guided me in the day before. He was beaming with a greasy, enthusiastic smile and scurried over to me, holding up a paper bag. "Morning, boss. Want a bun?" He held the bag out eagerly. "I went out of my way to get these from the Kwanbuli shop. Best buns in the entire capital. Try one." I squinted at him. Li Shi was only in his 20s, but his face was so wrinkled from constant grinning that he looked 40. Yesterday, this kid had led me straight into a confrontation at the main tent. I still wasn't sure if he was trying to set me up or if he just liked watching the chaos. "Boss, they're seriously amazing," Li Shi continued, seemingly oblivious to my scrutiny. "The buns from this place are hard to get. You usually have to pre-order." He practically tried to shove the bun into my hand, acting as loyal as a golden retriever. I glanced at him, then at the bun. It did smell incredible. "The buns are fine, but the name Kwanbuli is a bit ugly," I said, taking a bite. "Dogs are loyal friends. They don't betray their masters. If one did, I imagine it would end up as the filling for one of these." I looked down at the bun in my hand. The dough was thin, and the meat filling was huge. It was delicious. No wonder the high-ranking officials in the capital loved this place. I kept eating, acting like I was just making idle conversation. Beside me, Li Shi's expression flickered. He wasn't stupid. He knew I had seen through his little game from yesterday. I had beaten the son of the Marquis of Jinwu into a bloody pulp the moment I arrived. I clearly wasn't someone to be trifled with. If I decided to hold a grudge and make his life miserable, his career was over. "The buns are good," I said, just as Li Shi began to panic. "Bring me a serving every morning from now on." Before he could even process the words, I had already walked past him. Li Shi froze. Then a look of pure relief washed over his face. "You got it, boss. I'll bring you breakfast every single day," he shouted after me, his voice cracking with excitement. I stopped for a second, a strange look on my face. Every day? If people heard that, they'd think he was trying to date me. I took another bite of the bun and shook my head. Seriously, that name, Kwanbuli, was really terrible. By noon, Li Shi was back. His face was scrunched up into that same comical, wrinkled smile. "Boss," he whispered, leaning in close with a lecherous grin. "After we clock out tonight, I'm taking you somewhere fun." He was bold. Even though he was just a minor squad leader and I was a commandant, several ranks above him, he insisted on calling me boss, to close the distance between us. I looked at him skeptically. I knew exactly what he was hinting at. In a world with so little entertainment, fun at night usually meant one of three things: drinking, listening to music, or interacting with girls. The high-end brothels in this city were like luxury clubs. The women were stunning, but the prices were insane. A single night could cost a normal family half a year's income. And that was just for the basics. If you wanted to see a top-tier courtesan, money wasn't even enough. You needed status. Because of that, the lower-tier establishments were much more popular. They weren't as fancy, but they were affordable and high value. To be honest, I was actually looking forward to it. Sure, I was a gentleman, but a leader needs to bond with his men, right? I've got nothing going on tonight, I said, patting him on the shoulder. Since you're being so mysterious, I'll follow your lead. You've got a bright future, kid. Li Shi beamed and hurried off to make the arrangements. Being the boss was great. People handled the entertainment, and I didn't even have to reach for my wallet. I wondered how this would compare to the clubs back in my old world. I told myself this was purely for cultural research. The rest of the day was quiet. In the afternoon, I took my men out for a patrol. The capital was incredibly prosperous. Behind me, Xia Qian looked like a tourist, his eyes darting everywhere in awe. We passed by Princess Yaoguang's estate, and I caught a glimpse of the two massive stone lions guarding her gate. I didn't linger. I spent the rest of the patrol memorizing the layout of the city, specifically the locations of every major brothel. Not for my own pleasure, of course. I was a man of virtue. When night fell, the man of virtue followed Li Shi out of the Yulin Guard Yamen. I brought Xia Qian along, and we slipped into a quiet side alley. As we walked, I realized something was wrong. We were heading in the opposite direction of the red light district I had scouted earlier. Hee, boss, we're almost there, Li Shi chirped, his face practically glowing. Music, dancing, the works. I know your family keeps a tight leash on you. You had to train until you hit the 8th rank, so you probably never got to stay out late. Tonight, it's on me. I'll show you the real nightlife of the capital. I didn't say anything, but Xia Qian's face was already turning bright red behind me. He had never been to a place like this either, though he'd heard the kitchen servants whisper that these were the most magical places on earth. This isn't the way to Suyu Street, I noted calmly. Aren't all the best spots concentrated over there? I felt a sudden chill of suspicion. Was this a trap? And part of me wondered if the Zhao family was looking for revenge. Leading me into a dark, narrow alleyway was the perfect setup for an ambush. Li Shi must have sensed my hesitation. He quickly leaned in, his voice low and reassuring. He explained that common pleasure houses were too low class for someone of my status. A regular brothel was too public, and with my recent engagement to the second princess, a scandal was the last thing I needed. That's why I chose a place called Qingya Xiaozhu. Li Shi whispered like a conspirator. You can listen to music, watch the dancers, and even stay the night. Everyone wears masks inside. The privacy is top-notch. I looked at him, impressed. This kid was surprisingly thoughtful. Maybe he really was a talent in his own way. In the Great Wu Dynasty, visiting these places wasn't considered a disgrace. For scholars, it was actually seen as a refined, cultural pursuit. If a young man reached adulthood without visiting a high-end pavilion, he was considered a joke among the literati. I felt a wave of irony. These scholars were truly thick-skinned, turning a visit to a brothel into a point of pride. I remembered from my past life's knowledge that when the future empress eventually took power and unified the land, she would strictly ban this entire industry. Back then, the players in the game were devastated. They lamented the loss of the good old days they never got to experience. One player even tried to start a rebellion against the empress just to restore the glory of men. She killed him with a single slap. I thought you were taking me to the Jiafangxi, I joked. Li Shi gave a bitter laugh. He told me he couldn't possibly afford that place. Just walking through the door cost 5 taels of silver. Drinks and music were extra. If you wanted a girl to stay, you needed at least 10 taels. His eyes filled with longing as he talked about it. He had heard the women there were incredible. Most were the wives and daughters of disgraced officials. There was a certain thrill in knowing the woman you were with used to be the family of your superior or a high-ranking peer. That kind of status-driven satisfaction couldn't be bought with money alone. I stayed silent as we walked, listening to Li Shi explain the rules of the game. These places weren't just about flesh. They were about poetry, music, and art. The more refined the establishment, the more people flocked to it. Qingya Xiaozhu was exactly that kind of place. Of course, the core business of staying the night still existed. People didn't spend their evenings reciting poems just for the sake of literature. We soon reached a secluded courtyard that blended perfectly with the surrounding houses. A simple sign hung by the door, Qingya Xiaozhu. To an outsider, it looked like a normal residence. The name is elegant, I remarked. It was a clever cover for a place of spiritual exchange. Li Shi knocked on the door and continued his briefing. He told me the owner, Miss Qingya, was quite famous in the capital. Even high-ranking officials visited her. Entering the courtyard required a fee, but staying the night was a different story. That depended entirely on whether Miss Qingya found you talented enough. If she didn't pick you, you could still choose from the maids and servants. I realized Miss Qingya had a brilliant business mind. This wasn't just a brothel, it was a high-end private club. She used her own personal brand to create a sense of exclusivity. By making herself a prize that couldn't be bought with money alone, she stood out from the competition. It was classic marketing. Scholars are arrogant. None of them think they are less talented than the next guy. The more she turned them down, the more they wanted to come back and try again. Her customer retention rate must have been insane. I was genuinely curious to see this woman now. A small, round-faced maid peeked out from behind the door. She looked cute and innocent. Li Shi handed over our invitations, and the gate creaked open. I adjusted the mask Li Shi had prepared for me before stepping inside. The scent of expensive rouge hit me immediately. The courtyard was already filled with about 30 men, all dressed like scholars. They glanced at us briefly before returning to their drinks. I found a quiet spot and sat down, observing the room. It was a lively scene. Maids were dancing gracefully, and guests were playing drinking games. My gaze lingered on the dancers in the center of the yard. Their outfits were a bit revealing, but they carried themselves with an air of sophistication. They didn't look like common entertainers. They looked like daughters of noble families. No wonder this place was so popular. Suddenly, the beautiful sound of a zither filled the air. The chatter in the courtyard died down instantly. Miss Qingya is coming out, Li Shi whispered. He told me she was a master of poetry, song, and especially the ancient zither. Some said her skill rivaled the best performers in the Jiafangxi. I looked toward the main house. A slender, elegant silhouette appeared behind a silk screen, illuminated by the warm glow of lanterns. I apologize for the wait, gentlemen. A cool, melodic voice called out. A beautiful woman stepped out from behind the screen. She had a gentle smile on her face. Even though every man in the courtyard was wearing a mask, I could see their eyes light up instantly. She looked like the perfect image of a high-born lady, elegant, refined, and untouchable. I looked at Miss Qingya and couldn't help but smirk behind my mask. I wondered if this was what people called the Gapmo effect. It was an interesting play. Miss Qingya, you're joking, a man in the front row called out. He was dressed in expensive silks and his eyes were burning with heat as he stared at her. We came here to drink, and the night has just begun. We haven't been waiting long at all. Exactly, another wealthy-looking man added, puffing out his chest. A beautiful woman is always worth the wait. Qingya let out a soft, melodic laugh. She raised a silk handkerchief to cover half her face, acting the part of the shy, timid beauty. It was a calculated move. It made every man in the room want to pull her into their arms and protect her. Her presence completely eclipsed the other maids in the courtyard. All eyes were fixed on her, and the atmosphere reached a fever pitch. The quiet elegance from before was gone, replaced by men competing for her attention, each hoping to be the lucky guest invited into her private quarters tonight. She scanned the crowd, her gaze drifting over every mask. When her eyes met mine, they lingered for a fraction of a second. It felt like she was trying to peer through the wood and silk to see who I really was. The others noticed. They began to size me up. Even though I was masked and just sitting there casually sipping my wine, I knew I stood out. Some people are just born to be the center of attention. They started whispering, wondering if I was some hidden prince or high-ranking noble. But the tension didn't last long. In a place like this, we were all just customers. With our masks on, it was a level playing field. Gentlemen, Qingya said with a smile, why don't we start with a game of flowerless orders? It was a classic scholars game. We had to take turns reciting poetry based on specific keywords. If you failed, you drank. It required a solid grasp of literature. Most of the men nodded confidently, eager to show off. I played a few rounds and recited a few lines. I made sure to stay under the radar. I didn't want to stand out too much. Being from the Marquis household, I'd been forced to study the classics since I was a kid. I wasn't a grand scholar, but I knew enough to hold my own. Time slipped away as the games continued. We moved from poetry to drinking games, and finally to a full-on verse competition. The atmosphere was electric. I had to hand it to Qingya. She was a pro. She knew exactly how to pace the evening to keep the excitement building. A few scholars in the group were actually quite talented. Their poems were impressive even to me. "Everyone, I'm afraid I'm feeling a bit tired," Qingya said, rising from her seat. She gave a graceful bow. "Please, continue to enjoy yourselves." She looked every bit the noble daughter as she turned to leave. The men nodded, but the air grew tense. We all knew the main event was coming. Everyone wondered who she would choose to stay the night. The scholars who had been showing off all evening stood up, their faces full of confidence. They were sure they had it in the bag. As she disappeared, the mood in the courtyard shifted. Most people lost interest in the games. Some, knowing they had no chance with Qingya, started eyeing the pretty maids instead. "So, should we pick some maids, or just head back?" Lishi whispered to me. It was getting late, close to the city's curfew. Since the three of us hadn't done anything to stand out, Lishi assumed we were out of the running. My uncle, Xia Qian, sat behind me with a flushed face. This was his first time in a place like this, and he looked incredibly out of place. "Let's wait and see," I said calmly. Lishi went quiet, studying me. I could tell he was confused. By all accounts, this should have been my first time at a brothel too, but I was acting like a seasoned veteran. I was too composed, too relaxed. Meanwhile, inside the main house, the air was thick with steam. Qingya stepped into a large wooden tub filled with hot water and floating flower petals. The water hugged her pale, delicate skin. She leaned back, her damp hair clinging to her neck. The playful smile she wore outside was gone. Now, she looked cold, almost holy, like a goddess from a different realm. If I had seen her then, I would have thought she'd be great at role-playing. A maid entered to add more hot water. "Miss, are you keeping a guest tonight?" Qingya's place was famous for its overnight service, but she only took guests once or twice a week. That scarcity made men go crazy for her. One wealthy merchant had offered 1,000 silver taels for a single night, and she'd turned him down flat. Qingya frowned slightly, then her eyes brightened. "Go and invite the gentleman in the white mask. The one with the extraordinary aura. He stays tonight." The maid froze. "But miss, he didn't do anything special tonight. There were several scholars who performed much better. If you pick him, the others will be furious. It might ruin our reputation for fairness." "Tonight, it's him," Qingya insisted, a sharp smile playing on her lips. "The trouble we've been facing lately. He might be the one to break the deadlock. His identity is very special." The maid's eyes widened. She was a beauty in her own right, but she paled in comparison to her mistress. "That's Xia Chun," Qingya whispered. "The eldest son of the Marquis of Anong, the man who just got engaged to the second princess. I heard he kicked the son of the Marquis of Martial Arts out of the Imperial Guard yesterday. It seems he's finally finding his footing." The maid, Xiao Lian, didn't hesitate any longer. She bowed and hurried out. Back in the courtyard, I was still sipping my wine when a young man in a white mask approached us. "Excuse me, sir," he said with a friendly smile. "My father is Li Gang, a secretary in the Ministry of Revenue. I noticed you're bearing from across the way. Is this your first time at Qingya's?" He paused, then added, "My name is Li Kuei." The young man was dressed like a scholar. He gave me a polite bow, snapped open a folding fan, and looked at me with an air of supreme confidence. "My name is Li Kuei," he said. I felt my mouth twitch behind my mask. I couldn't help but wonder if he had a thick beard hidden under there and was about to call me brother, like the famous brute from the legends. "Do you have an older brother?" I asked. I couldn't resist. Li Kuei looked confused. "Why do you ask, sir? I am an only son." He fanned himself slowly, trying to maintain his sophisticated image. "Just curious," I said, feeling a bit bored since he didn't get the joke. "My name is Yangshi. I don't have a courtesy name. Just call me by my name. I had thrown out a fake identity without hesitation. When you're out having fun, especially in a place like this, you never use your real name. Master Yang, Li Kuei bowed again. I could see his mind racing. He was clearly trying to figure out which Yang family in the capital I belonged to. He looked at me expectantly, but I didn't offer any more details. He probably thought I was related to Elder Yang from the Grand Secretariat. The Yang family was known for their strict upbringing, so it was rare to see them in a place like this. I didn't care what he thought. His father was just a mid-level official in the Ministry of Revenue. In this city, a fifth-rank official wasn't someone I needed to worry about. Li Kuei noticed my coldness, but he didn't back off. My aura told him I came from money. Brother Yang, he whispered, leaning in. It's unlikely Lady Qingya will keep anyone tonight. Why don't we head over to Siyu Street? I know a brothel there with some incredible girls. The wine is great, and we can stay the night. My treat. He patted his chest, acting like we were old friends. There's a saying that men become brothers by doing 4 things together: breaking windows, carrying guns, splitting loot, and visiting brothels. He was betting on me being from a powerful family. If he played his cards right, this friendship could pay off big time. Behind me, Li Shi bristled. He glared at Li Kuei like the man was trying to steal his job. Li Shi had arranged this night for me, and now this stranger was trying to lure me away to some second-rate establishment. It made it look like Li Shi's planning was subpar. Suddenly, the door to the inner quarters opened. Xiao Yin stepped out. The crowd, which had been preparing to leave, froze. Their eyes lit up. Even if they couldn't spend the night with Qingya, a night with her head maid, Xiao Yin, would be a dream come true. Li Kuei's eyes went wide. He stared at her, mesmerized. To him, Xiao Yin was more beautiful than the top beauties at most other houses. He started dreaming, convinced that she was walking toward him. Maybe she noticed his noble aura? Maybe she knew who his father was? He stood taller, only to watch in horror as Xiao Yin walked right past him. She stopped directly in front of me. "Young master," she said softly, bowing low. Her white dress hugged her curves as she moved, drawing every eye in the courtyard to her. "My mistress requests your company." The courtyard went silent. Then, the air grew heavy with jealousy. People remembered me now. Qingya had looked at me for a second longer than the others earlier, but I hadn't done anything impressive during the games. I had been unremarkable. Several scholars stood up, their faces flushed with anger. "This is unfair," one shouted. "He did nothing special tonight. Why him?" Li Kuei was turned to stone. He had just finished telling me it was impossible to stay here, and now I was being invited in. He looked at me, bewildered. Was it just because my mask looked better? Xiao Yin took a deep breath and smiled at the rowdy crowd. "Gentlemen, the choice of who stays is entirely up to my mistress. Her mind is made up. Please, return another day." She turned back to me. "This way, please." I stood up and looked at Xia Qian and Li Shi. "You two head back first." Xia Qian started to protest, but Li Shi pulled him back, grinning ear to ear. "Understood, boss. But don't forget to wake up early. We have a mission with the lantern bearers tomorrow." He leaned in and gave me a look that said I knew you had it in you. I ignored him and followed Xiao Yin. As I passed the stunned Li Kuei, he grabbed my sleeve. "Brother Yang," he hissed, his eyes searching mine. "What's the secret? How did you get her to pick you?" I paused for a moment, then patted his shoulder. Maybe I'm just more handsome than everyone else. I didn't wait for a reaction. I walked away, leaving them with nothing but the sight of my back. A few scholars tried to rush after me, but 2 massive bodyguards stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. The scholars immediately sat back down, suddenly remembering their manners. I stepped inside the room. The layout was even more grand than the courtyard. I kept my pace steady, following Xiao Yin deeper into the estate. I took everything in as I walked, scanning every detail of the estate. "Young master, we've arrived," Xiao Yin said. We stopped at a room in the inner courtyard. She didn't move to open the door, signaling for me to go in alone. I hesitated for a second at the threshold, my eyes catching a glimpse of a graceful silhouette through the paper screen. I didn't let the doubt linger. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Immediately, a thick fragrance hit me. It was strange and intoxicating, a mix of fresh flowers and the natural scent of a woman. It smelled incredible. Qingyu was sitting at her dressing table. She didn't acknowledge me at first, quietly focusing on her reflection. The bronze mirror showed a face as beautiful as a lotus flower. Droplets of water clung to the tips of her hair, sliding off like tiny pearls. She picked up a silk handkerchief and slowly wiped the moisture away, her movements as gentle as a breeze brushing against spring petals. Then, she picked up a wooden comb and ran it through her dark, cloud-like hair. From top to bottom, stroke after stroke, each movement released a faint, ghostly fragrance. Her long hair became smooth and lustrous under the candlelight, shining like black jade. She wore only a light robe, yet not an inch of skin was exposed. Her cheeks were flushed and glowing. She had the refined air of a high-born lady, and the sight made the atmosphere in the room feel suddenly, dangerously tempting. I watched her in silence. I didn't want to ruin the moment. "You certainly have a lot of patience, young master." A cold, clear voice rang out. Chinya turned her head, revealing a face that could literally topple kingdoms. "To ruin such a beautiful scene would make me seem quite unrefined," I said with a light laugh, playing the part of the breezy playboy. "You are already in my room," she said, her eyes trailing over me with a hint of playfulness. "Are you still not going to take off that mask?" She stood up and walked slowly toward me. "I was thinking," I replied, a smirk playing on my lips. "Keeping the mask on might make things more interesting." Chinya froze for a second. She didn't quite catch my meaning at first, but she was sharp. She realized I was talking about what would happen later in the night. She let out a soft, mental cold snort. Men, she thought. They're all just after the same thing. I sat down at the table and glanced at her figure, specifically her chest. I couldn't help but think that with a body like that, she could probably execute a high-level martial arts move like the Triple Thousand Thunder Strike. "The moonlight is beautiful, and the night is long," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "If you really want to see, I suppose we should be honest with each other." I reached up and pulled off the mask. Under the flickering light, my face was revealed. Sharp features, deep and bright eyes, a high bridge to his nose, and a faint, knowing smile on my lips. My skin looked as clear as white jade in the shadows. Chinya had caught a glimpse of me before with her special technique, but that was a hurried look from a distance. Now, we were inches apart. Her gaze froze. She tried to look away naturally, but she couldn't. What a handsome face, she thought, unable to stop herself from admiring me. It was the first time she had seen a man with such peerless features. Subconsciously, her mind drifted to the second princess. The princess is getting a bargain. With a husband who looks like this, she'll never get bored in the bedroom. Realizing where her thoughts were going, Chinya's face turned bright red. She quickly looked away, trying to regain her composure. "Your appearance is truly extraordinary, young master," she said, forcing a smile. "You could probably compete for the title of the capital's most handsome man." She explained that some bored people in the city had created a ranking list. They picked the 4 most beautiful women and the 4 most handsome men. They called them the 4 great beauties and 4 great gentlemen. It was a bit tacky, but the 8 people on that list were said to look like immortals. "So, you've seen these so-called 4 great gentlemen?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of tea. I made myself at home, acting like I owned the place. "I've had the honor of meeting one," she said, moving closer until I could smell her perfume. She sat down beside me. "But compared to you, he falls a bit short." She wasn't just flattering me. According to her intel from the Imperial Guard, I was only 17. In a year or two, when I reached adulthood, my looks would peak even further. I almost laughed. I was basically becoming the male version of a legendary beauty. I had spent 17 years hidden away in the Marquis's estate, and now, the moment I stepped out, I was turning heads. Then I thought about my future wife, the woman destined to be empress. If she was the emperor, I really was going to be the pretty consort at this rate. Wait, the fake name I gave earlier was Yang. Everything was lining up in a weird way. "What are you thinking about?" Chinya asked, noticing my vacant stare. She wondered if her compliment had broken my brain. "Nothing," I said, snapping back to reality. I sat up straight and looked at her. "Drinking tea on a long night like this is so boring," she teased, her eyes bright. "I have fine wine here." She picked up a flask and filled a cup for me. "Tell me," I said, looking for a topic. "How beautiful are these 4 great beauties you mentioned?" I honestly didn't know much about the capital's gossip. Qingya looked surprised. You don't know? I thought men were obsessed with this. But she quickly slipped back into her professional role. These 4 women are all from incredible backgrounds. Unlike the men's list, their spots are undisputed. She started listing them off. One was the top disciple of the Heavenly Master Mansion. Another was the holy daughter of the Heavenly Dragon Temple. The other 2 were from the secular world, the daughter of Prime Minister Lin Hanpu, and the second daughter of the Emperor, Princess Yaoguang. I heard recently that Princess Yaoguang has been betrothed, Qingya added, watching my face closely, to a son of the Marquis of Anong. I kept my face like stone. No reaction. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she was talking about me. People from the Heavenly Master Mansion and the Dragon Temple are on the list? I asked, genuinely curious. Those were the 2 pillars of Taoism and Buddhism in the empire. Their leaders were the strongest people alive, and they usually stayed out of worldly affairs. They didn't enter themselves, Qingya whispered in her soft, southern accent. But the public insisted on putting them there. And how do you compare to them, Miss Qingya? I asked. She blinked, then shook her head with a self-deprecating smile. How could I compare to them? Whether it's status, beauty, or temperament, I am worlds apart from those 4. I don't deserve the comparison. She stood up slowly and looked down at me. Young master. The sky was pitch black. Qingya didn't seem interested in talking anymore. She walked over to the bed and climbed onto the mattress, her entire aura shifting in a heartbeat. Gone was the elegant lady. In her place was a seductive demoness. Her eyes shimmered with a heavy, magnetic pull. The air in the room turned thick and sweet. I smiled and walked toward her with lazy steps. It seems Miss Qingya is losing her patience, I teased. I sat on the edge of the bed, inches away from her. She pouted, her eyes filled with a fake, playful resentment. It's not that I'm impatient, she whispered. It's that you're too cold-hearted. Why waste such a beautiful night just talking? I laughed and leaned in, reaching out to pull this goddess into my arms. But as I moved, I felt a strange ripple of energy. It was a subtle, heavy force designed to make me drift off to sleep. It wasn't strong. I crushed the sensation instantly, but I didn't let her see that. This woman was definitely more than she appeared. I wanted to see her hand. Was this a trap set specifically for me? I let my body go limp and slumped onto the bed, pretending to fall into a deep slumber. Humph, men really are all the same. The door creaked open and Xiao Yin, the maid, stepped inside. She spat on the floor, looking at me with pure disgust. He just got engaged and he's already running to a place like this, she hissed. She had been guarding the door the whole time. Qingya sat up, her seductive act vanishing. She was cold and dignified again. I didn't expect him to come here either, Qingya sighed. But it's a perfect opportunity. We can use him to feed the lantern bearers the information we need. They started talking, thinking I was dead to the world. They were members of Huang Chengxi, an intelligence network. Apparently, the lantern bearers were closing in on them because of some stolen military maps and a setup by the Phoenix State. Their network in the capital was taking heavy hits. Xiao Yin looked worried. But he's just a captain in the Imperial Guard. Will he actually be useful? Qingya looked down at me. He's a noble son trying to make a name for himself. He won't pass up a chance for a promotion. I'll pull him into a dream and plant the seeds. Tomorrow, he'll accidentally find clues at the Springflower House. She smiled, looking like a cat with a mouse. He'll think he's a genius for solving the case, never knowing he's just a knife in our hands. She leaned over me, her eyes glowing with a strange, watery light. 2 ethereal, blue butterflies drifted out of her eyes and dove into my forehead. That was her mistake. Inside my mind, my hidden power, the heavy pupils, roared to life. In that mental void, I stood tall, looking down at her like an ancient god. My eyes had 4 pupils, swirling with a terrifying, absolute authority. Her soul began to tremble. The butterflies shattered into dust. Back in the real world, Qingya's eyes snapped open. She was deathly pale. She tried to scramble back, but I didn't let her. I reached out and clamped my hand around her slender wrist. I pulled. She tumbled forward, landing hard against my chest. I looked her in the eye, a cold smirk playing on my lips. For a split second, she saw my pupils merge into a deep, dark abyss. Let go of my mistress, Xiao Lian screamed. She lunged forward, her aura exploding with the power of a 7th-rank martial artist. I didn't move. My other hand moved to Qingya's throat, gripping it just tight enough to be a warning. I didn't realize the famous Miss Qingya was such a talented sorcerer, I whispered. I used my thumb to tilt her chin up, forcing her to look at me. Her heart was hammering against my chest. Her blue eyes were wide with terror. Trying to trap me in a dream? That's a dangerous game to play. Her face flushed a deep red, her skin growing hot under my touch. A sorcerer and a 7th-rank warrior hiding in a brothel. This was getting interesting. She felt the heat wherever my fingers touched her skin. It was as if my hands held some kind of dark magic, a sensation she had never experienced before. I watched the confusion flicker in her eyes. You weren't asleep at all, she whispered, her voice trembling. You heard everything we said. She tried to pull away, her mind racing. It was impossible. I had seen her pour the powder into the tea and the wine myself. It was a colorless, odorless sedative developed by the Royal City Intelligence Service, guaranteed to knock out even the strongest warrior. Coupled with her soul-trapping sorcery, she should have had me at her mercy. Maybe I'm just more robust than your average man, I said with a casual shrug. Or maybe your dosage was too low. In reality, my system had scanned every drop of liquid before it touched my throat. Anything harmful was instantly neutralized. To the world, I was just a man, but my body was a fortress against every poison known to man. Qingya's face went pale. The dosage was low, she stammered. Let go of our mistress, Xiao Lian shouted, her hand gripping the hilt of her blade. The courtyard is full of our people. You'll never walk out of here alive. If you're smart, you'll release her right now. Otherwise what? I interrupted, tilting my head to look at her. Are you going to make a move? Do you really think you can subdue me before I snap her neck? You're just a 7th-rank, little girl. I scanned Xiao Lian. She was young for a 7th-rank essence refining expert. This confirmed it. Qingya wasn't just some high-end courtesan. She was a big fish in the Royal City Intelligence Service. Catching her was better than finding a chest of gold. Go ahead, I challenged, my voice dropping an octave. Call your men. Maybe there's a 6th or even a 5th-rank expert out there who can take me down. But I'll remind you of 2 things. I leaned closer to Qingya, my breath brushing against her ear. First, those men out there aren't your family servants. They're intelligence agents. If they burst in and see their high and mighty mistress pinned to my chest like this, the scandal will ruin you before the executioner's axe even touches your neck. Second, it's past curfew. The lantern bearers and the Imperial Guard are patrolling these streets. If a fight breaks out here, how long do you think it'll take for a real master to sense the commotion? I let out a low, cold laugh and pinched Qingya's soft, silken cheek. I had sent my uncle and Lin Shi away for a reason. I knew exactly how to play this game, and I knew the city's security was my ultimate shield. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Xiao Lian's face was flushed with rage, her teeth grinding so hard I could hear them. She wanted to kill me, but she knew I was right. If the authorities came, none of them would escape. Young master, Qingya said, her voice finally regaining its calm. She looked me straight in the eye, her gaze searching mine. You clearly know who we are. Why don't you let me go so we can sit down and talk like civilized people? She realized now that the useless air of the Marquis of Anong was a lie. I was a predator she hadn't accounted for. Can't we talk right here? I asked, my fingers tracing the smooth line of her back. She shivered, her skin turning a deep shade of crimson as a jolt of electricity seemed to run through her. It wasn't romance, it was a reminder. I was the one in control. She was my prisoner. Fine, she gasped, trying to maintain her dignity. Since you heard us, I'll tell you the truth. We didn't steal the military deployment maps. The Great Feng Inspection Bureau set us up. They used us as a shield to draw the heat away from themselves. Why should I believe you? I countered. I don't care who stole the maps. I know your Royal City Intelligence. That's a fact. Turning you in and wiping out this nest would be a massive achievement for me. Why should I go looking for a harder path when you're right here in my arms? Qingya and Xiao Lian went silent. They couldn't argue with that logic. To the authorities, a spy was a spy, regardless of which agency they served. However, I continued, watching their eyes light up with a sudden, desperate hope. I have another proposal. If the inspection bureau has moles in your organization, I'm sure you have people in theirs. Give me the locations of their secret branches in the capital. Give me the evidence that they stole the maps. Do that, and I'll let you go. Their emotions were on a roller coaster. Qingya looked at me with a mix of fear and newfound respect. I wasn't just some ambitious soldier. I was aiming for something much bigger. Destroying a small nest of spies was a good start, but it wouldn't be enough to catch the Emperor's eye. If I could expose the inspection bureau and recover the maps, I would bypass the middle management of the lantern bearers entirely. I only had 5 years before the coup. I couldn't afford to be a lowly 7th-rank captain forever. I needed to rise, and I needed to do it fast. How can I trust you? Qingya asked. If I give you the intel and you arrest us anyway, I lose everything. You can't, I said, my hand moving to her chin, forcing her to look into my eyes. The only thing you can trust is my word. You can choose not to gamble, but look at your situation. Do you really have a choice? As I spoke, I let a hint of the heavy pupil's power leak out. The air seemed to ripple. For a second, Qingya saw that terrifying, godlike gaze again. Her mind went blank, her resistance crumbling under the weight of an authority she couldn't understand. The silence lasted for a long time. Finally, her lips parted. Fine, she whispered. I'll give you the files on the inspection bureau. The next morning, the sun poured into the room like a sea of liquid gold. Qingya slowly opened her eyes. Her entire body felt heavy and exhausted. Her waist ached, and her legs felt numb, especially her knees, which were bruised as if she had been kneeling for hours. Memory flooded back. She sat up abruptly and looked at the space beside her. I woke up and found a man sleeping right next to me. My heart skipped a beat as I realized his hand was still draped firmly over my waist. I tried to shift away, but the movement only made his grip tighten. He pulled my body flush against his chest, his skin radiating a natural, steady heat. My face burned bright red. I looked down at myself and let out a small sigh of relief. My clothes were still on. They were messy and wrinkled, but I was still wearing the same outfit from last night. Good morning, Xiachen said. His eyes were closed, and his voice was thick with sleep, yet it carried clearly through the room. Can you let me go now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I had spent years gathering intelligence using my secret identity, but I had never let a man touch me. I usually used my spells to trap targets and illusions. I was still pure, or at least, I had been until last night. Now, after spending the night in the same bed with this man, things felt different. I bit my lip, watching him with a mix of frustration and confusion. My reputation as the future princess consort's fiancé was one thing, but my personal dignity felt like it had been trampled. Not yet, he muttered, still not opening his eyes. This courtyard is full of your people. If I let you go and they rush in to tear me apart, what then? He was incredibly cautious. Even in his sleep, he seemed to see everything. He had stayed the night because of the city-wide curfew, but he hadn't let his guard down for a second. Is the information I asked for ready? He asked. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the heat of his hand on my hip. Xiao Lian, I called out. The door burst open instantly. Xiao Lian rushed in, her eyes bloodshot from a lack of sleep. She was clutching a long blade, her face twisted with murderous intent. Miss, did this bastard do anything to you? She screamed. She had spent the entire night standing in the courtyard because Xia Chun had kicked her out of the room. I'm fine, I said, though my voice wavered. I remembered the middle of the night. I had thought he was asleep and tried to break for the door. The moment I tried to circulate my energy, he had reacted as if he had eyes in the back of his head. He pinned me down instantly. As punishment for my disobedience, he had forced me to remain in a humiliating, kneeling position for hours. That was why my knees were bruised and aching now. He only let me lie back down once I was completely exhausted. This teenager was a monster. Xiao Lian looked at my disheveled state and grew even more frantic. Even if she hadn't heard any screaming, she knew we had shared a bed. Everything that needed to be done was done, Xiachen said, waving Xiao Lian over like she was a common servant. Now give me the files. It's late, and I have to get to work. His casual attitude made Xiao Lian's blood boil. Xiachen checked the time. If he didn't show up at the office soon, Xiachen and Li Shi would probably think he had spent the night being too active and ended up with weak legs. He couldn't have them thinking he lacked stamina. Give him the files, I commanded. I didn't know what work meant in his context, but I was done struggling. I hadn't won a single exchange with him all night. Xiao Yin retreated reluctantly and returned a moment later with a stack of papers. She practically shoved them into his hands. Xia Chun lounged back on the bed, taking the documents with one hand while finally releasing me with the other. I felt a wave of relief as his hand left my shoulder. Our clothes were so thin and messy that it had felt like there was barely any barrier between us. Even though he was focused on the papers now, I didn't dare move. I had learned my lesson. He could sense movement even while sleeping. It was a terrifying ability. Interesting, Xia Chen smiled, flipping through the pages. Your Imperial City Intelligence Bureau has planted quite a few people in the Inspection Bureau. The three great shadow organizations, the Lantern Bearers of Great Wu, the Imperial City Intelligence of Great Qing, and the Inspection Bureau of Great Foam, were constantly infiltrating each other. The capital of Great Wu was the Lantern Bearers' home turf, but everyone knew spies from the other two nations were hiding in plain sight. It was a stalemate. If the Lantern Bearers wiped them all out, a new batch would just arrive the next day. We usually stick together with the Inspection Bureau, I said coldly. But this time, they tried to use us as a shield. They deserve whatever is coming to them. Xia Chen finished the files and went silent. Suddenly, he bit his finger. A drop of bright red blood appeared, shimmering with a strange, pulsing energy. Open your mouth, he said calmly. I hesitated. As a sorceress, I knew that blood could be used for dark, binding spells. Before I could protest, he grabbed my chin, forced my mouth open, and shoved his bleeding finger inside. I coughed, my breath hitching as I tasted the copper. What did you do? It's a technique from my Marquis household, he said, wiping his hand. Even a martial artist can use it. My essence is in your blood now. No matter where you go, I can find you. I hope these files are accurate. If you stay obedient, we might have more chances to cooperate. He pinched my cheek one last time, grinning like a demon as he stood up from the bed. It's getting late, he said, his voice dominant and cold. Help me wash up and get dressed. He was treating my home like his own palace. I bit my lip, my mind racing with 1,000 ways to kill him, but eventually, I stood up. For the first time in my life, I began to serve someone else, combing his hair and straightening his robes. My technique was clumsy. Her movements were stiff, and she clearly had no idea what she was doing. I didn't care. I sat there with cold patience, watching her struggle to dress me and comb my hair. It was like taming a wild animal. If anyone from my old world saw this, they'd recognize it instantly as a compliance test. I needed to know she would obey, no matter how much she hated it. By the time I left her room, I felt refreshed. I walked into the Yamen office, and Xia Qian was already there waiting for me. He hurried over, eyes wide with curiosity. Young master, he whispered. On the other side of the room, Li Shi caught my eye. He had a knowing, lecherous smirk on his face. He jogged over and slapped me on the shoulder. Chief, how was last night? Li Shi asked, his voice full of that man-to-man understanding. I just smiled and patted his shoulder back. How else could it be? It was great. Li Shi let out a silly laugh, satisfied with the answer. I didn't waste time on details. My expression shifted, the smile vanishing instantly. I scanned the room. Are all the brothers here? I asked. Basically everyone, Xia Qian replied, confused by my sudden change in tone. Good. Assemble the Jia and E battalions. Now. Xia Qian froze. He didn't understand why I was calling a sudden assembly, but he knew better than to ask. Li Shi remained calm, sensing the tension. Within minutes, 200 men were moving. The courtyard was a sea of black armor and sharp steel. The other battalions watched from the sidelines, whispering. They didn't understand why we were gearing up like we were heading into a major battle so early in the morning. I pulled Xia Hui aside and whispered my orders directly into his ear. His eyes grew more serious with every word I spoke. We split into two groups. I told him firmly. Speed is everything. If anyone resists, shoot to kill. But the core targets? I want them alive. Bring them back. Yes, Commander, Xia Hui barked. In the camp, he used my official title, not young master. I stepped out in front of the ranks. Jia Battalion, follow Xiaohui. E Battalion, you're with me. I didn't explain a thing. 200 Imperial guards looked at each other, completely in the dark, but nobody dared to speak. Unless I ordered them to storm the Imperial Palace, they would follow without question. We marched out of the Yulin office, a wall of steel heading straight for the East District. Young master, what exactly are we doing? Xia Qian whispered as he caught up to my side. Don't ask. You'll see in a minute. Xia Qian swallowed hard and nodded. He knew that when I looked like this, blood was about to spill. 15 minutes later, we arrived at East Main Street. This was the heart of the capital's entertainment, tea houses, theaters, and opera houses. This was where every trend in the Great Wu Dynasty started before spreading across the world. I stopped in front of a massive, famous theater, the White Moon Pavilion. Surrounded, I ordered, my voice cold as ice. Don't let a single fly out. If anyone tries to break the perimeter, shoot them dead. A shiver went down the spines of my men. The White Moon Pavilion was famous. Even members of the royal family came here to listen to plays. Killing someone with the wrong background could mean a death sentence for a soldier. But then they remembered who I was. They didn't hesitate. They fanned out, sealing every exit. Inside, the theater was packed. A play called The Tale of the Mandarin Ducks was mid-performance. It was the biggest hit in the city. It told the story of a marquis's son falling in love with a princess from the eastern barbarian tribes. It was a tragic, edgy story where the princess dies and the hero turns into a dark, vengeful monster. The crowd loved the drama. Soldiers, the pavilion is surrounded. The shout cut through the climax of the play. Servants and messengers scrambled into the private boxes, faces pale with terror. The heavy front doors were kicked open, and my guards poured in, blades drawn. The music screeched to a halt. Chaos erupted. Imperial Guard business. Nobody moved. I warred. The sheer power in my voice rattled the windows and stunned the crowd into silence. I stepped into the light. Behind me, 10 guards drew their swords in unison. On the flanks, crossbows and firearms were leveled at the audience. One wrong move, and the room would become a sieve. The wealthy nobles who were about to complain about their play being interrupted suddenly found their voices trapped in their throats. They sat back down, very quietly. My eyes scanned the crowd and landed on the stage. Specifically, on the handsome young actor playing the lead role. He was staring back at me, his eyes sharp and calculating. He's pretty, I thought, but that's about it. The intel from Qing said this actor was a heartthrob among the noble women of the capital. To me, he just looked like a target. Take him, I said, pointing a finger. 5 guards leaped onto the stage like tigers. Their movements were clean and professional. The actor's face went grim. He knew this wasn't an accident. We were here for him. Suddenly, a warrior actor from the troupe stepped in front of him. He didn't hesitate. He flicked his wrist, launching hidden daggers at my men. My guards parried with their heavy blades, the clanging of metal echoing through the hall. 3 more actors joined the fray, pulling weapons from their costumes. The audience screamed. They realized the actors they had been cheering for were actually highly trained martial artists. Go, I commanded, my face expressionless. 10 more of my elite guards charged the stage. More troops flooded through the doors. The actor stood in the center of the chaos, his eyes fixed on me as the trap closed in. Shiling's cover was blown. He knew it. Even if he managed to fight his way out of the moonlit tower, he'd be hunted by the Imperial Guard and those shadows from the lantern bearers. He had no retreat. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He reached into his sleeves and flicked his wrists. Dozens of paper effigies fluttered into the air. Some held broadswords, others carried long spears. As they drifted, they expanded rapidly, swelling into man-sized figures that moved with eerie, lifelike precision. They weren't just toys. They hit my guards with shocking force, clashing against steel with the strength of real warriors. The hall erupted in screams. The noble audience watched, faces pale, as the blade light from the combat expanded across the room. Luckily, my guards held the line, keeping the civilians from being trampled. I narrowed my eyes. This was taking too long. I wanted a lightning strike, a blitz to catch the Jinsha Bureau spies completely off guard. Now, we were bogged down in a supernatural brawl. All of you move. Take him down now. I barked. I didn't wait for them. I reached back and drew my crimson longblade. As I ignited my blood essence, the blade began to glow, heat radiating from the steel in shimmering waves. My aura surged, turning hot and oppressive. It was a power of pure yang, domineering and absolute. I stepped forward and swung. The blade sliced through the nearest paper effigy. It didn't just cut, it vaporized. The paper burst into a pillar of flame, turning to ash in seconds. These things could hold off 2 or 3 elite guards, but to me, they were just kindling. I led the charge like a tiger among sheep. One swing, one kill. Behind me, Xia Qian and the rest of the guards followed the path I carved through the chaos. My focus never left Xiling. The intel from Qingyu was clear. This actor was a high-level operative for the Jianxia Bureau in the capital. He coordinated their movements. He was the one behind the theft of the military defense maps. He was the brain. Xiling looked grim, but he didn't panic. He was scanning the exits, looking for a gap in my formation. "Break through," he shouted, his voice cold. He threw out more paper figures, his face turning deathly pale. It was clear that animating these things drained his internal energy fast. "Go. I'll hold them back." The lead actor who had attacked first stepped in front of Xiling, brandishing a massive broadsword. I closed the distance in a heartbeat. The actor roared, swinging his blade downward with enough force to split a mountain. He wanted to cleave me in two. I already knew his move before he finished it. As he raised his arms, I lunged. To the onlookers, it must have looked like a miniature sun rose from my blade, blinding everyone in the room. When they could finally see again, the actor was frozen. A thin red line appeared down the center of his body. Then, before their horrified eyes, he slid apart. 2 halves of a man hit the stage, blood drenching the floor. The noble women in the balconies shrieked, their faces white as sheets. The handsome young hero they had admired minutes ago was now a butcher covered in gore. I didn't care about their fear. I stood there, blood splattered across my face, looking like a demon crawled out of hell. I didn't stop to admire my work and went straight for Xiling. "You're Xiachen," Xiling hissed, backing away. "The trash of the Marquis's house? It seems everyone was blinded. You killed a peak 8th rank martial artist in one strike. You've been hiding quite the secret." He stared at me with cold, calculating eyes. Their file said I was a nobody, but a 17-year-old at the 7th rank? Even in a house of heroes like mine, that was a monster-tier talent. I didn't waste breath talking and only had eyes for the center of the enemy formation. I ignored the subordinates trying to block me, circulating my red sheep body-refining art. Blood energy erupted from my pores, coating my skin like a suit of invisible armor. I moved like lightning. My double pupils manifested, and suddenly, the world slowed down. The frantic movements of the guards and spies became sluggish, as if time itself had turned to syrup. Xiling saw a window and lunged for it, feet leaving the ground as he aimed for a nearby exit. But I was faster. I appeared behind him like a ghost. I reached out. Xiling gasped, feeling the air being sucked out of his lungs by the sheer pressure of my grip. I grabbed him by the back of the neck and hoisted him up like a stray kitten. He was a sorcerer. Sorcerers have 1,000 tricks at a distance, but once a martial artist closes the gap, they're finished. Especially when that martial artist is me. With the leader captured, the fight died quickly. The actors who tried to resist were cut down by crossbow fire. The rest surrendered. The entire operation had taken less than 10 minutes. "Take everyone back to the yamen," I told Xiaqian. I gave him 30 men for the escort. "Until I return, don't let anyone, and I mean anyone, take these prisoners from you." "Boss, I'll go with Brother Xiaqian," Li Shi said, stepping forward. "There are a lot of prisoners. It's safer if I help." I glanced at him and nodded. My guards moved through the tower, pinning the captured spies and driving wind snow needles into their pressure points. These were special tools from the Celestial Master Mansion. Once they were in your system, your blood energy was locked down. You were as helpless as a civilian. Xiling glared at me, his eyes full of venom. "You came straight for me. You knew exactly who we were. You're trying to steal the credit from the lantern bearers, aren't you? You've hidden yourself for years. You're ambitious, Xiachen." He had expected the secret police. He hadn't expected to be taken down by a waste from a noble house. I still didn't answer him. Instead, I raised my fist and slammed it into the back of his head, knocking him out cold. It was violent, simple, and effective. I didn't hand him over to Li Shi. I kept him in my own grip. A few of you, follow me, I commanded, heading for the door. We have another stop. Speed was everything. I was going to break the Jinsha Bureau before they even knew the war had started. The history books would later call this the day the founding emperor broke the enemy's plot with thunderous speed. They would say he captured the foreign spies, recovered the stolen defense maps, and earned the nickname, the Jade-Faced Wolf. But in that moment, standing in the aftermath of the raid at White Moon Tower, I wasn't thinking about history. I was thinking about survival. As I led my men out, the silence of the street was heavy. I hadn't said a word during the entire fight. I just acted. I could feel the eyes of the city on me. From the balconies of the surrounding buildings, noble women and socialites were leaning out, their previous terror replaced by a sudden, frantic interest. Who was that officer? I heard a young lady whisper, her cheeks flushing red. He's so handsome. Find out which house he belongs to. Is he married? I didn't give them a second glance. My face remained cold, my movements mechanical. To them, I was a spectacle. To me, this was a war. High above the street, in the best private box of the White Moon Tower, two people watched me with the detachment of gods watching a play. One was a young man with an aura of effortless nobility, the third prince. Beside him sat a woman who radiated power and elegance, her every movement dripping with a quiet, dangerous charm. Su Buliu, the third prince said, his voice light as he sipped his tea. How was that officer's skill? A swordsman emerged from the shadows of the corner. He held his blade close, his eyes sharp. This was Su Buliu, a genius known throughout the capital, a man rumored to be on the verge of reaching the 4th rank. His control of blood energy is perfect, Su Buliu replied. Every ounce of his strength was concentrated in the tip of that blade. He has already grasped the intent of the blade, a path of pure heat and power. In the 7th rank, he has few equals. I cannot say if he is hiding even more. The third prince looked intrigued. If you were at the same realm, could you beat him? Su Buliu paused. I am currently at the peak of the 5th rank. If I suppressed my power to the 7th, I would win. But if you ask if the me of years ago could have beaten him, I would have to fight him to know. The prince raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected such a high evaluation from a man as arrogant as Su Buliu. He smiled, a predatory look crossing his face. Interesting. Find out who he is and bring him to me. A seedling like that wasted in the Imperial Guard. It would be fun to have a dog like him at my heels. There's no need to investigate. The woman beside him finally spoke. Her voice was sultry, filled with a knowing amusement. This was Princess Pingyang, the emperor's youngest sister. Though she wasn't his biological sibling, the emperor had raised her like a daughter and allowed her a level of political influence no other woman possessed. She leaned forward, her eyes dancing as she watched my retreating figure. If I'm not mistaken, he's already family. That is Xia Chun, the eldest son of the Marquis of Anong, the one recently betrothed to Yao Guang. The third prince blinked in shock. The trash of the Xia family? The one the Marquis ignored for years? How can he be this strong? My sources said he was beautiful, the princess murmured, tracing her jawline with a delicate finger. But seeing him in person, those four great beauties of the capital don't even compare. My niece is quite lucky. I knew nothing of the eyes watching me from the tower. I was moving too fast to care. My next stop was a small inn, a known transit point for the Jinsha Bureau's intelligence. We hit it like a hammer. There was resistance, but my men mowed them down with crossbows before they could even draw their steel. Search everything. I barked as we dragged the innkeeper out in chains. Don't leave a single scrap of paper behind. Take it all. But when we reached the third location, a charity home for orphans and the elderly on the North Street, the trail went cold. The building was a hollow shell. Only a few confused children and bedridden old men remained. Sir, there's no one here, one of my guards reported, sounding frustrated. No documents, nothing. I stood before the tattered sign of the charity home, my jaw tight. From the moment we left the yamen to now, less than an hour had passed. And yet, they had already cleared out. Their information network was terrifying. Sir, where to next? The guard asked quietly. My men still didn't even know who they were arresting. They just knew I was leading them into a storm. Back to the yamen, I said, waving them off. The snake had been startled. There was no point in chasing shadows anymore. As soon as I stepped back into the Feather Forest Guard headquarters, I saw Qin Mu waiting at the gates. His face was a mask of confusion and growing concern. "Xia Chun," he called out, rushing toward me. "I heard you took 200 men out the moment you arrived this morning. What is this? Why have you brought back so many prisoners?" He looked at the lines of bound men, his eyes widening. He was the commander, yet I had bypassed him entirely. In any other situation, he would have had me arrested on the spot. "They are from the Jinsha Bureau," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. It was an emergency. There wasn't time to ask for permission. "I'll explain everything to the general myself." Qin Mu's face went pale. The Jinsha Bureau. I hadn't just conducted a raid. I had declared war. The look on Qin Mu's face was priceless. He wanted to scold me, but the words seemed to die in his throat. I leaned in, pulling him aside before he could make a scene. I kept my voice low, confidential. I told him I knew I had bypassed protocol, but I promised him that once the general heard the news, he wouldn't just be happy, he'd be ecstatic. I hinted that this credit might even be enough to get Qin Mu a promotion. I made sure to keep a polite smile on my face. Earlier, I had been the cold-blooded executioner, but now I was the perfect subordinate. Qin Mu was my superior, and I knew how to play the game. In politics, you want as many friends as possible and as few enemies as you can manage. If you unite everyone around you, when the time is right, they'll be the ones pushing you toward the top. Qin Mu's eyes lit up. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I told him the prisoners were already secured and there was no rush. I suggested we go see the general together. I wanted him to feel included in the victory. We walked into the office of General Li Wenzhong. When I told him the stolen military defense maps were actually taken by spies from the Jinsha Bureau, he bolted upright, so fast his tea spilled all over his robes. He was stunned. Qin Mu looked just as shocked. Everyone in the capital knew the maps were missing. It was the biggest scandal in the city. The common consensus, even among the elite Tidengren investigators, was that a man named Huang Qingxi had stolen them. Now, I was offering a completely different story. I explained that the men I had just captured were the masterminds behind the theft. I told the general that even if the maps weren't with them, these men were confirmed spies from the enemy state's Jinsha Bureau. Capturing them was a massive win regardless. Li Wenzhong sat back down, trying to compose himself, but a grin was already spreading across his face. If the Jinsha Bureau really had the maps, this was a legendary achievement. If not, it was still a major victory. There was no way to lose. But there was a catch. I asked the general if he could handle the pressure from the Tidengren. They were an independent, powerful organization, and if we solved the case they were failing at, we'd be stepping directly on their toes. We'd be climbing to glory by using their faces as a doormat. Li Wenzhong hesitated for only a second before his gaze turned steely. He declared that the Feather Forest Guard served the Emperor directly. The Tidengren had no authority over us. The credit was dangling right in front of him, and he wasn't about to let it go. He ordered me to keep things quiet for now, break the prisoners' wills, and gather the evidence. Once he had the proof, he would personally go to the palace to see the emperor. He looked at me with newfound respect. He realized I wasn't just some arrogant noble brat from the Marquis' estate. I was handing him a silver platter. I bowed respectfully and told him I would follow his lead. I knew the importance of sharing the spoils. A smart player feeds his subordinates and satisfies his superiors. Those who try to keep all the glory for themselves usually end up dead. Besides, I was still too weak to face the Tidengren alone. I needed Li Wenzhong to be my shield and fly the flag while I operated from the shadows. Qin Mu stood there watching us, looking a bit dazed. He was technically my boss, yet here I was, deep in high-level strategy with the general while he couldn't get a word in. He seemed to resign himself to his fate. If he could earn credit by doing absolutely nothing but following my lead, he was fine with being the backup. As I left the general's tent, I ran into Xia Hui. He reported that he had destroyed 3 outposts and captured several key figures, though the 4th was empty by the time he arrived. It seemed the enemy's network was finally reacting, but we had already secured the system leader, the big fish. By noon, the entire camp felt the tension. General Li was pacing back and forth, frequently visiting the makeshift prison cells at the back of the headquarters. Every time he came out, he was beaming. The soldiers whispered, knowing something huge was happening. I stayed in my tent, only leaving to help with the interrogations. Since we didn't have a professional torture chamber, I suggested a few creative memory recovery techniques to the guards. I didn't stick around for the details, but soon, the screams echoing from the cells were enough to make even the veteran guards turn pale. They started looking at me with a new kind of fear. To them, the new captain was a total monster for dreaming up such methods. Even trained spies couldn't hold out for long. By the afternoon, the Titangren finally arrived. We expected them. You can't move 200 troops through the capital without the city's premier intelligence agency noticing. A man named Kai Ming, a high-ranking official from the Titangren, showed up with a dozen men. He flashed his badge, his tone polite, but his eyes cold. He demanded we hand over the prisoners immediately. I stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "Officer Kai," I said calmly, "I think you might have the wrong idea." This was my showdown with the Yulin Guard. Qin Mu led his men to the gate, blocking Kai Ming's path. He looked at the official with a face full of confusion, as if he had no idea why the Titangren were there. "What people? Who are you talking about?" Qin Mu asked. Kai Ming's jaw tightened. He wasn't in the mood for games. "Captain Qin, don't play dumb. Do you really take the Titangren for fools?" He took a step forward, his voice dropping an octave. "I don't have time for this back and forth. Whether you caught foreign spies or common criminals this morning, hand them over. We'll take it from here. I promise my brothers in the Imperial Guard will get their fair share of the credit." It was a demand, not a request. Kai Ming tried to push past, but Qin Mu didn't budge. He stepped up, his expression turning icy. "This is the Imperial Guard headquarters. Even a Titangren official has no right to barge in whenever he pleases." At his signal, the soldiers behind him moved. They formed a human wall, blocking the entrance. Kai Ming's face turned a sickly shade of green. He stared at Qin Mu for a long time, his eyes flashing with silent fury. Finally, he took a deep breath and forced himself to look calm. "Fine, I'll report this to the commander. The Imperial Guard has no authority to detain prisoners like this. We will be filing a formal complaint against you." He turned on his heel and marched away. He knew he couldn't force his way in. Besides, a lowly captain wouldn't dare act this way unless someone powerful was pulling the strings. "Sir, what do we do now?" one of his subordinates asked. "What else can we do?" Kai Ming snapped, kicking a nearby stone in frustration. "I'm just a 1,000-man commander. I can't overturn the world on their turf. We go back and report." Despite his outburst, his mind was racing. The Yulin Guard were willing to offend the Titangren just to keep these prisoners. Was it for the glory? Or was there something else? Then it hit him. The defense maps. That had to be it. Kai Ming had a bad feeling. His agency knew the Imperial Guard had snatched people from the Great Phone Procuratorate, but they didn't know why. My uncle, Xia Qian, and General Li Wenzhong had locked the place down. No one was allowed in or out of the cells. Even for an elite spy agency like the Titangren, getting intel out of the Imperial Guard was nearly impossible without the Emperor's direct order. But the Titangren were terrifying when they had a lead. By that night, they tracked down a group of Procuratorate members who had fled their outposts earlier that morning. After a vigorous interrogation, the truth finally spilled. In the dead of night, Lu Li, the commander of the Titangren, sat bolt upright in his chair. "What? The Procuratorate stole the defense maps?" His subordinate trembled. "That is what the prisoners confessed, sir." Lu Li sank back into his seat, his face pale. He realized they were in deep trouble. His agency had been chasing ghosts for days while the real culprits were right under their noses. If the Emperor found out, he'd look incompetent. Or worse, the Emperor would think he was covering for someone. "Bring me the lead investigator," Lu Li roared. How could he mess this up? He paced the room, then stopped. He needed to move. "Fast. Get my robes. I'm going out." He had been asleep with his concubines, but now he was wide awake. He had to get to the Imperial Guard headquarters. He needed to negotiate with Li Wenzhong. They had to spin this. It couldn't be a failure on the Titangren's part. It had to be a joint operation, where both agencies worked together to catch the thieves. That was the only way to turn a disaster into a promotion. But as he reached the front hall, his butler ran in, looking panicked. "Master, a messenger from the palace is here." Lu Li's heart sank. He was too late. The Imperial Guard had already made their move. I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. I had stayed late at the headquarters the night before, making sure every piece of evidence linking the Procuratorate to the stolen maps was airtight. The high-level political games weren't my concern yet. I had done my part. I was practicing my forms in the courtyard when a servant appeared at the gate. "Third young master, the head of the house wants to see you." I nodded and headed toward the inner sanctum of the estate. I knew what this was about. My uncle and Li Wenjong had moved with lightning speed to settle the case before anyone could react. Last night, the general had gone to the palace to present the evidence. The news was already spreading. The Yulin Guard had recovered the stolen Northwest defense maps. Their reputation was soaring. I reached the Mingda courtyard, a place with 400 years of history. Every head of the Xia family had lived here. As I walked in, I saw a young man coming out. He was handsome, in his early 20s, and looked sharp. It was my second brother, Xia Xian. He was a captain in the Longwu Guard and one of the rising stars of the family. He stopped and looked at me, his gaze different than usual. It was the first time the Imperial Guard had ever snatched a victory away from the Tidingren, and he knew I was the reason why. "Xiao Chun," he said, nodding. "Go on in. Father is waiting for you." He didn't say much else, but he didn't need to. We had grown apart since I moved to the side courtyard, but there was no real malice between us. I walked into the garden and saw my uncle, Xia Qian, sitting at a stone table. I bowed, then sat down across from him. A maid poured me some tea and quietly retreated. I didn't wait for an invitation. I grabbed a pastry from the table and took a bite. It was delicious. My new life was finally starting to move in the right direction. The pastries on the table were light and sweet. I ate them quickly, treating them as my breakfast. I knew this courtyard well. Before I was 12, I spent most of my time here. Every tree, every blade of grass, and every maid was familiar to me. It was only when I grew older and my pride took over that I moved out to my own small, secluded quarters. My uncle, Xia Qian, watched me eat in silence. His gaze was long and unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "The defense maps," he began. "That was your plan, wasn't it?" There were no outsiders here. My uncle didn't waste time with pleasantries. He had received word at dawn that something massive had happened in the palace overnight. "In a way," I said, swallowing a mouthful of pastry and washing it down with tea. But I gave the credit away. I let Li Wenjong take the lead. My uncle nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "You did the right thing. You're just a captain. Entering the political arena with too much light on you is dangerous. It's better to stay in the shadows." He paused, his expression turning grave. "Do you know what happened last night after General Li went to the palace?" I shook my head. Once the arrest was made and the maps were secured, I had gone home. I knew my limits. I didn't follow the aftermath. I couldn't interfere with what came next. "Lu Li has fallen," my uncle said. The words felt like a physical weight dropping into the room. Lu Li had commanded the Tidingren for 26 years. He was the king of shadows, the man who handled the empire's darkest business for the emperor. For a man like that to fall meant a political earthquake was coming. Heads would roll. "Because of the maps?" I asked. "Partly," my uncle sighed. "The theft happened on his watch. That was professional negligence. Then, he targeted the wrong people during the investigation. 2 massive blunders in a row. The emperor stripped him of his command last night." I stayed silent for a moment. I hadn't expected my actions to topple one of the 5 most powerful men in the Great Wu Empire. But as I thought about it, the pieces clicked into place. "The maps were just the spark," I said, looking around the quiet garden. "He's been the emperor's blade for decades. He's done the dirty work and offended everyone in the process. His fall wasn't just about a mistake. It was about every faction in the capital finally finding an excuse to twist the knife at the same time." My uncle's eyes snapped to mine. They became sharp, piercing. He stared at me for several long seconds before slamming his hand on the table. "Silence," he barked. "Watch your tongue." He was scolding me, but his eyes were glowing with a strange intensity. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. I could tell what he was thinking. Our family had plenty of warriors, but we lacked people with political instincts. He realized that while I had been cooped up in the estate, I had been watching the world with terrifying clarity. I didn't stop. I wanted him to know exactly how much I understood. Our emperor is brilliant, I continued, my voice calm. But he is also incredibly selfish. For years, he's played the civil officials against the military to keep his own power balanced. He used Lu Li and Princess Pingyang as his shields. They did the killing, they took the blame, and he sat high above on his throne, reaping the rewards. He's a master of the imperial art. My uncle didn't stop me this time. His face was a mask, but he leaned in. What else do you see? I smiled. The Marquis of Anong had survived for 600 years. You don't last that long by being blindly loyal. You last by knowing when to hide and when to move. My uncle and my grandfather had stayed secluded in this estate for years because they knew the emperor was suspicious. The civil officials are the winners here, I said. With Lu Li gone, the balance has shifted. Correct, my uncle said. The Grand Secretary moved personally this time. The emperor sacrificed Lu Li to appease them. The Tidingren were meant to suppress the civil officials, but that group has grown too strong to ignore. He stood up and looked out at the garden. You've seen a lot, nephew. But remember, smart people are the first to die in this city. I can guess you were the one behind this, and so can others. Li Wenjung isn't smart enough to pull off a raid like that on his own. He turned back to me, his gaze softening. Stay low for a while. Don't draw any more attention. I'll handle the fallout and cover your tracks. I stood up and bowed deeply. Thank you, uncle. I played the part of the perfect gentleman, nodding respectfully as I took my leave. My uncle, Xia Qian, seemed satisfied. He waved a hand, dismissing me without another word. Between smart people, there was no need for chatter. Over the next few days, the capital felt like it was hit by an earthquake. The Ministry of Justice and the Imperial Guard moved in force. When a titan like Lu Li falls, the vultures start circling. In the world of officialdom, every position is a hole, and there are always too many radishes waiting to fill it. One man's ruin is 1,000 others' opportunity to climb. In the shadows where ordinary people couldn't see, the Tidingren went on a rampage. They launched a brutal crackdown on the Great Feng Inspectorate. Spies who had been hidden in the capital for years were hunted down, dragged into the light, and executed on the spot. Far away on the northwest border, the atmosphere grew even colder. The army began massive movements, declaring martial law and preparing for war. They were bracing for the Qin Kingdom to the west and Great Feng to the north. War was no longer a possibility. It felt like a certainty. Back in the palace, the military elite were summoned for emergency councils. Even the inner cabinet was debating who should lead the charge if the border ignited. Amidst this suffocating tension, my uncle was called to the palace multiple times. Rumors started trickling down to me. They said the emperor was planning to reinstate my uncle. Some even whispered that my grandfather, the old Marquis of East Tranquility, Xia Chutian, might be called out of seclusion. 36 years ago, my grandfather nearly wiped Great Feng off the map during the Battle of Huaiyang. The mere mention of his name brought a surge of confidence to the court. The emperor won't actually let your grandfather lead, my uncle told me one afternoon. We were walking through the estate gardens. Ever since I revealed my strength, he had been seeking me out, sharing news and asking for my perspective. It was a massive shift in our relationship. I walked half a step behind him, listening intently. His military merit from the Huaiyang campaign is already too high, I noted. If he wins another war, the emperor would have no choice but to name him a prince. The throne won't risk that. Neither will the cabinet. My uncle glanced at me, his eyes complex. Who would have guessed that the chaos gripping the empire started with a lowly Imperial Guard captain? So, I continued with a small smile. If the Qin Kingdom really pushes for war, the only people capable of leading are you or Grand Marshal Ouyang Jing. There were very few men in the Great Wu dynasty who could command a massive campaign. My grandfather, my uncle, and Ouyang Jing were the only ones with a real shot at beating the Qin. 2 out of those 3 were from the Xia family. It was no wonder my family had spent 2 generations playing dead. When you hold half the empire's military might in your hands, the emperor doesn't see a hero, he sees a threat. The emperor has already ordered your father to end the fighting in the eastern wastelands quickly, my uncle said, his voice heavy. Fighting on two fronts is too much pressure. If the war drags on, the Qin will definitely strike. And the emperor will never let me and your father hold command at the same time. My father, Xia Yuan, currently held over 100,000 troops in the east. If a new war broke out, another 300,000 would be mobilized. That would put nearly half of Great Wu's total military force under Xia family control. No ruler would ever gamble on that kind of loyalty. I stayed silent. It sounded like my parents would be returning from the eastern wastelands sooner than I expected. The tension in the city only grew. The Tidingren confirmed that Great Phone was moving troops near the border. The inner cabinet held meeting after meeting deep into the night. But amidst the war talk, another major event shook the capital. A new commander of the Tidingren was appointed. His name was Ma Song. The news caught everyone off guard. Ma Song had always been a nobody, leading the smallest of the 8 departments within the Tidingren. But while everyone else fell with Lu Li, he had somehow stayed on his feet and snatched the top prize. I didn't spend much time thinking about him. The Tidingren weren't my concern yet. I was waiting for my reward. The map incident was settling down, and it was time for me to reap the benefits. Based on the timing, my promotion should arrive within a day or two. There was one other thing I was tracking. The night after I left the Qingyao Pavilion, the entire place burned to the ground. Nothing was left but ash and charred bones. The city's elite were heartbroken, mourning the loss of their goddess, the beautiful Qingyao. Such a shame about Lady Qingyao, Xiaqian sighed. He was walking behind me, a deep-fried dough stick in one hand and a cup of soy milk in the other. He had been there with me that night and was clearly affected by her death. I didn't look back. I took a bite of a steamed bun, the savory juices exploding in my mouth. It was good, though I found myself craving a bowl of spicy rice noodles instead. Hard to find a good bowl in this part of the capital. I swallowed the bite and spoke calmly. Everyone has their own fate. Some people are dead, but they're still walking around. Others are alive, but they might as well be dead. Xia Qian scratched his head, clearly lost by my philosophy. I didn't bother explaining. I didn't believe for a second that Qingyao was dead. She was a smart woman. She knew that after the fall of Lu Li, all eyes would eventually turn to the place where the intel came from. To protect herself, she used the fire to erase her identity completely. I glanced at my system interface. A small red dot was pulsing on the map. I had lied to her that morning. My blood didn't have any tracking properties. I was a martial artist, not a sorcerer. But I had the system. I had spent these past few days wandering the city, mapping out 95% of the capital. The moment I marked her in the system, she was mine. The map showed her hiding in the western district of the city. I wasn't going to hunt her down just yet. As long as she stayed in the capital, she couldn't escape my grasp. I planned to find a time deep in the night to give Qingyao a surprise. She had no idea I could see her every move on my map. I returned to the Yulin Guard headquarters. The moment I stepped into my military tent, Qin Mu approached me with a mysterious look on his face. "What brings the captain here in person?" I asked with a smile. I didn't get up. "What's with the captain talk?" He laughed, his face wrinkling with a genuine grin. "If you don't mind, just call me Old Qin." He sat down beside me and poured himself a cup of tea. He wasn't the stiff, serious officer I had first met. Solving the case had changed our relationship. We were allies now. "After this, you might be promoted directly to captain," Qin Mu said, exhaling a long breath after a sip of tea. "We'll be the same rank." He looked at me with a hint of envy. I was 17. He was 35. To be equals at my age was unheard of. It meant my future was limitless. "The military defense map case is settled then?" I asked. I knew the harvest was coming. The capital had been obsessed with the Northwest military situation lately, but the high officials hadn't forgotten the map. The Yulin Guard had cracked the case. That meant rewards. "Congratulations, Captain," I said, raising my teacup like it was wine. "Haha, you're the one who deserves the top credit," Qin Mu replied. "The general has already reported your deeds. You'll be a captain at the very least." He sighed. If I weren't so young, my contribution, destroying the Great Phoenix Inspection Manners Network, would have earned me an even higher rank. Still, a 17-year-old rank 5 captain was a rarity in the 800-year history of the Great Wu dynasty. The general might be transferred to the Longwu Guard soon. Qin Mu continued, his voice dropping. He'll be the great general there. I might follow him. That would leave an opening for you here. The Longwu Guard was different from us. We only had 3,000 men and handled city security. They had 6,000 elites. They guarded the inner palace and the emperor himself. Their great general held immense power and reported directly to Emperor One. Is the news reliable? I asked. The decree hasn't dropped, but the general has visited the palace twice in 2 days. It's almost a certainty. My mind began to race. A change in position meant a reshuffle of power. If Li Wenjong was taking over the Longwu Guard, he was definitely the emperor's trusted confidant. My previous hunch was right. Qin Mu leaned in closer, checking the surroundings. The previous Longwu general got too close to the crown prince, he whispered. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood perfectly. The Longwu general was the emperor's bodyguard. If a bodyguard gets cozy with the heir, it's a threat. The relationship between an emperor and his prince was always a balance of legacy and competition. I filed this away. The emperor didn't trust the crown prince. That's why he supported the third prince, to maintain a balance. This struggle was exactly what would lead to the bloody coup in 5 years. I felt a spark of excitement. The political stage was getting crowded, and I wanted my turn to dance. That afternoon, I stayed in my tent. I didn't go out to patrol the streets. Everyone knew the promotion decrees were coming. I spent the time reading a famous book on military strategy. Even though I had read it before, the insights were still valuable. Sir, a voice called from outside. Enter, I said without looking up. Li Shi walked in. He stopped for a moment, looking at me with a dazed expression. I had taken off my armor and wore simple robes, my hair pinned up casually. I suppose I looked more like a scholar or a wandering immortal than a soldier. What is it? I asked calmly. The general wants to see you, sir. It's likely good news. Li Shi lowered his head, not daring to look at me anymore. He told me later that I looked like I was about to ascend to the heavens. I understand. You may go. I waved him off. As the critical moment approached, my heart grew strangely still. I stood up, straightened my robes, and walked toward Li Wenjong's tent. When I entered, I saw the general sitting at his desk. He was reading the exact same book I had been, the Nanyang Military Strategy. The strategy says, a general must have a clear heart to devise a plan and a stern spirit to discipline an army, Li Wenjong said without looking up. What follows? To be a leader, one must maintain absolute reason regardless of joy or sorrow, I answered instantly. It was the opening line of the book. Li Wenjong put the book down and smiled. You have great composure. You truly are a son of the Xia family, a lineage of famous generals. He told me he had been watching me. While the capital was in an uproar, I hadn't come to him once to beg for news or ask about my reward. I had the patience of an old man, not a teenager. I trust you, General, I said, sitting down as he gestured. I did my job. I only had to wait for the result. I told you, call me uncle when we're in private, he said with a wave of his hand. Are you curious about your reward? Qin Mu mentioned I might take his spot as captain, I replied, and that you were moving to the Longwu Guard. Normally, that's how rewards and promotions are handled, Li Wenjong started, his voice dropping an octave. But now, things have changed. I felt a sudden tightening in my chest. My brow furrowed. Had something gone wrong? I waited, my mind racing through every possible complication. Li Wenjong continued. It's confirmed that Qin Mu and I are moving to the Longwu Guard. But the issue is you, Xia Chun. I looked at him, genuinely surprised. I had assumed the delay was due to some political pushback against Li Wenjong's own promotion to Great General of the Longwu Guard. I never expected the obstacle to be me. The original plan was to promote you to Commandant, Li Wenjong said, giving me a long, searching look. But the Emperor himself stepped in. The Emperor? I repeated. My eyes sharpened. I hadn't expected the man at the very top to personally interfere with a mid-level military appointment. Don't worry too much, Li Wenjong said, taking a slow sip of his tea. He actually smiled. He didn't say you couldn't be a commandant. He just said there was no rush. He thinks young people need to be tempered and polished more. He seemed amused. I realized it was because he finally saw a crack in my composure. Until now, I had been acting more like a seasoned veteran than a teenager, and I think it had unnerved him. Seeing me surprised made me seem human again. It's actually a good thing, Li Wenjong said, patting my shoulder. There are thousands of officials in this court, but only a handful ever catch the emperor's eye. Now go get ready. You're coming to the palace with me. To the palace? The emperor wants to see you personally, Li Wenjong said, his expression turning solemn. This was big. For years, the emperor had rarely attended court. Most officials only saw his face once a year at the annual assembly. He usually communicated through the grand secretaries of the inner cabinet. For him to summon me personally was a massive signal to the rest of the world. Either I was being groomed for something great, or I was being watched very closely. Even Li Wenjong couldn't guess which one it was. I understand, I said, taking a deep breath. I forced myself to be calm. I had performed a great service for the empire, and I was the future son-in-law. Emperor Wen wasn't going to eat me alive. Half an hour later, we were in a carriage heading toward the heart of the inner city. The emperor has reigned for over 50 years, Li Wenjong whispered, giving me a crash course in palace etiquette. For much of that time, he stayed away from women. He spent 20 years obsessed with Buddhism and another 10 with Taoism. It was only after his ministers begged him to produce heirs that we got the crown prince and the others. He warned me that since the birth of his children, the emperor had become even more unpredictable. Nobody could read his mind anymore. When you face him, don't have too many thoughts of your own, he cautioned. Just listen and answer. I nodded, piecing together a profile of the man. Emperor Wen was a complicated figure. Under his rule, the Great Wu dynasty had grown incredibly powerful. He had nearly wiped out the Great Feng Empire 36 years ago and pushed our borders hundreds of miles south 20 years ago. Now, the war with the Eastern demons was ending. On the surface, we were the strongest nation under heaven. But I knew the truth. Constant warfare had bled the people dry. Internal tensions were at a breaking point. Without the future empress stepping in, this empire would collapse in 5 years during the bloody coup. We were at the peak, but the only way left was down. The carriage jerked to a stop in front of a massive, towering wall. We're here, Li Wenjong said. We stepped out. Armored soldiers stood guard everywhere. 2 men approached us immediately. Lordly, the soldiers said, saluting. They were from the Longwu Guard. Rumors had already spread that their current general was falling and Li Wenjong was taking over. They were eager to show respect. Search us, Li Wenjong said, holding out his arms. I need to enter the palace. Even the highest officials had to be searched. It was the law. The soldiers did a quick, respectful pat-down and waved us through. I followed Li Wenjong in silence, my eyes scanning everything. We passed through a gate with 3 large characters carved above it, the White Tiger Gate. My blood ran cold. In 5 years, this was where the coup would start. The third prince would lead his army through this exact gate, turning the palace into a slaughterhouse. I looked at the walls. They were reinforced with magical arrays and lined with heavy crossbowmen. It was an impregnable fortress. The only way the third prince could have taken it was if someone opened the gate from the inside. He must have already bought off the commanders here. An old eunuch led us deeper into the palace. As we walked, the sheer scale of the place hit me. Glazed tiles shimmered in the sun. Elaborate carvings of mythical beasts sat on every roof corner, watching us. It had 800 years of history baked into every brick. Generally, you may take the prince consort inside, the old eunuch said with a polite smile. He didn't have the typical arrogance of a palace official. Thank you, Eunuch Ma, Li Wenjong replied casually. I reached into my sleeve and pulled out a silver ingot, sliding it into the old man's hand. His eyes lit up for a second, but he quickly tried to push it back. I am just a servant. I couldn't possibly take the prince consort's money, he stammered. He was a smart one. He knew I wasn't just any fiancé. I was a xia, and the emperor had summoned me personally. He didn't want to overstep. You've been waiting for us a long time, I said with a small smile, closing his fingers over the silver. It's just a little something for some wine. I stuffed the silver ingot directly into Eunuch Ma's belt and gave him a quick wave before turning toward the palace. I could feel his eyes on my back. He was a man who ran errands for the emperor but held no real power. The high-ranking officials he usually dealt with never treated him with respect, let alone cared how long he'd been waiting in the sun. To him, That silver wasn't just money. It was a rare moment of being seen as a human being. I followed Li Wenjong through a long, echoing corridor that opened into a massive hall. Before I could even take in the surroundings, Li Wenjong grabbed my arm and pulled me down into a kneel. "Rise," a voice echoed. It was ethereal, drifting through the hall so that I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. I looked up. In the center of the hall, an old man sat cross-legged on the floor. He wore a simple Taoist robe, but a string of Buddhist prayer beads hung around his neck. His hair was a dull white, and he kept his back to us, hiding his face. This was the man who controlled the entire Great Wu Empire, Emperor One. "This is the Long Wu Guard token," the emperor said, his voice calm as if he were deep in meditation. "Take it. Report for duty tomorrow." As he spoke, a strange energy rippled around him. For a split second, I saw it, a golden dragon, dozens of meters long, shimmering over his body. It looked ghostly, like it wasn't ready to fully manifest yet. I wondered if the dragon was faint because the empire was weakening, or if it was something personal to the emperor himself. Beside me, Li Wenjong hit the floor with a loud thud, his voice trembling with excitement. "This subject thanks your majesty. I will not fail your trust." "Leave us," the emperor said, waving a hand like an immortal dismissing a cloud. Li Wenjong stood up. As he passed me, he gave me an encouraging look, silently telling me not to be nervous. Then, the heavy doors closed. I was alone with the most powerful man in the world. Incense smoke swirled through the air. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I didn't speak. I just waited. I knew that in this game, patience was survival. "Sit," the emperor finally said after a long silence. "Thank you, your majesty," I replied. I performed a formal kowtow before finding a seat nearby. "Your personality is nothing like the Marquis of Anong," he remarked, still keeping his back to me. It felt like he had eyes in the back of his head, watching my every move. "I was separated from my father when I was a child," I said softly. "I have few memories of him, and we rarely write. I don't truly know what kind of man he is. But your majesty's presence is as heavy as a mountain and as divine as a god. It's intimidating, yet, for some reason, I feel a sense of kinship. It makes me a little bolder than I should be." The emperor went silent. I could sense him processing my words. "I heard the Marquis has ignored you for years," he said, his voice suddenly dropping an octave, becoming cold and heavy. "He even had another son out in the eastern wilderness. Do you resent him?" I let my body flinch. I let a flash of anger spark in my eyes before quickly masking it with a layer of sorrow. I made sure my lower lip trembled just enough for him to notice. "You know that our great Wu dynasty has been ruled by filial piety for 800 years, the emperor barked, his voice like cracking ice. "He is your father. As a son, how dare you harbor resentment?" I threw myself out of the chair and onto my knees, my forehead hitting the floor with a sharp crack. "The empire is built on the hierarchy of ruler and subject, then father and son," I cried out, my voice steady but raw. "The ruler comes first. You are the father of the people. When my emperor asks a question, how could I dare to lie to my father?" Suddenly, a terrifying pressure slammed into me. It felt like a tidal wave. My heart plummeted. This man wasn't just a politician. He was a high-level practitioner, likely above the third rank. Maybe even a second-rank peak master. If he was this strong, how did the third prince manage to kill him in 5 years? There had to be someone even stronger helping the coup. I kept my face pressed to the floor, maintaining my act. A ruler is a ruler, a subject is a subject, a father is a father, and a son is a son, the emperor repeated slowly. "If more people understood their place like you do, I would have far fewer headaches." He finally turned around. His eyes were like burning torches, scanning me from head to toe. "Look at me." I raised my head. I noticed he had stopped using the formal we and was using I. He looked healthy, his eyes bright despite his white hair. "You have a good face," he said with a nod. "You are a fit match for my daughter, Yaoguang. To speak of such philosophy at your age, you've clearly spent your time in the Marquis' estate reading. Your insight is better than most of the scholars in my court." I could see he loved the idea. To a monarch, a philosophy that demanded absolute, unconditional loyalty was the ultimate weapon. Did someone teach you those words? He asked. No, Your Majesty. They are my own thoughts. Good, good. He actually laughed, a sound so rare that the servants in the corners of the room looked visibly shocked. They say the Marquis of Andong's house only produces warriors, but it seems they've finally grown a scholar. You know why I called you here? I do not, Your Majesty. You solved the case of the stolen military maps and captured the spies from the Procuratorate, he said, his tone shifting back to business. Normally, that would earn you the rank of colonel, but I don't intend to give you that position. Do you feel wrong? I have no complaints, I said earnestly. Whether it is lightning or rain, it is all the Emperor's grace. I believe Your Majesty has a deeper purpose for me. The Emperor sighed, looking at me with something that almost looked like genuine affection. If only every official in this court had your clarity. Emperor Wen looked at me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze shifting. I was no longer just a random chess piece he had moved on a whim to pass the time. I had become a surprise he hadn't expected. If you had spent your life reading, the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the quiet hall, if you had followed the path of a scholar and entered the Hamlin Academy, you would have had the talent to become the Grand Secretary. A heavy silence followed. Behind the pillars, I saw the silhouettes of the maids and eunuchs stiffen. To hear such praise from the Emperor himself was staggering. If anyone else had said it, it would be dismissed as flattery. But from his lips, it meant he truly saw that potential in me. My only ambition is to protect our home and the country, I replied, my voice steady and resonant. If Your Majesty has a need, I am willing to be the sharpest blade in your hand. Even if my blood must stain the battlefield, I will not regret it. I was pouring every ounce of acting talent I had into this performance. I spoke with such conviction that, for a second, I almost believed my own lies. To die on the battlefield, the Emperor murmured, savoring the tragic weight of the words. He looked at me with a trace of regret. It really is a waste for you to practice martial arts. But you're right. I do have a great use for you. With your intelligence, staying in the Imperial Guard is a waste of talent. I want you to join the Lantern Bearers. He had decided. In his mind, I was a loyal son-in-law who was already at odds with my own father, the Marquis of Andong. I was the perfect tool. The Lantern Bearers? I asked, feigning confusion. Are you unwilling? He countered. Your Majesty, wherever you send me, I will go with my whole heart, I said, letting a flash of excitement cross my face. I looked exactly like a hot-blooded youth eager to prove himself to his king. The Emperor nodded, satisfied. The 9 divisions of the Lantern Bearers are currently missing a chief. You will take the position of acting chief. Your Majesty, I fear my experience is too shallow for such a rank, I said, hesitating. The chief of a Lantern Bearer division was a 4th-rank official. I was currently a 7th-rank colonel. Jumping 3 levels in one go was unheard of. It broke every rule in the book. I'm sending you there. No one will dare to object, the Emperor said, his voice turning sharp and authoritative. And it is only acting for now. I am sending you there because I have a specific mission for you. I straightened my back, my face flushing with feigned intensity. What is the mission, sire? Even if I have to climb a mountain of swords or walk through a sea of fire, I will complete it or die trying. I deserved an award for this. If there were Oscars in this world, I'd be taking one home tonight. The Emperor gestured for me to calm down. There is no need for such dramatics. You saw through the Procuratorate schemes, so I know you have wit. I want you to enter the Lantern Bearers and assist Ma Song. Your goal is to uproot the remnants of Lu Li's faction. His eyes locked onto mine, searching for any flicker of hesitation or deceit. I waited a beat, then looked up slowly. Is that all, Your Majesty? I asked quietly. What else do you think there is? He asked, his tone playful yet distant. Your Majesty summoned me personally, I said boldly, meeting his gaze. I assume there is something else you need me to do. You really are clever, the Emperor said, his voice softening. For a moment, he looked like an ordinary old man, though the aura of power never truly left him. Stand up. I do have one more thing. I stood and took a seat where he indicated. Once you enter the Lantern Bearers, he said, his voice dropping, your primary task is to find the mole. There is a spy from the Imperial City Court's Procuratorate hidden deep within the organization. The Lantern Bearers have been infiltrated? I let the shock show on my face. Infiltrated might be too strong a word, but there is a traitor, the emperor said, narrowing his eyes. And their rank is likely high. Otherwise, Luli wouldn't have made such a stupid mistake as targeting the wrong person for the military maps. I will find the truth within 3 months, I promised, cupping my fists. 3 months? You're very confident. I do not joke in front of the emperor, I replied firmly. Good. I will wait for your news. The emperor flicked his wrist, and a white gold medallion drifted through the air toward me. Report for duty tomorrow. Since the case is urgent, I grant you permission to choose a few men from the Imperial Guard to take with you. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed me. I bowed with textbook precision, showing every ounce of respect required. Later, inside the carriage, I sat opposite Li Wenjong. The silence stretched between us until I finally broke it. Uncle, don't you want to know what the emperor said to me? Li Wenjong didn't even open his eyes. The emperor asked me to leave so he could speak to you in private. Why would I ask? He gave me a heavy responsibility, I said. He's sending me to the Lantern Bearers as a chief of the 9 divisions. Li Wenjong's eyes snapped open. The shock in them lingered for a long time before fading. What? After Luli fell, 2 chiefs went down with him. But Luli ruled that place for 20 years. His influence is everywhere. The emperor is sending you there to help the commander, Ma Song, clean house. A bloodbath is coming. He leaned his head against the carriage wall, looking tired. For 20 years, everyone saw Lu Li's glory. Who would have thought it would vanish in an instant? The lantern bearers held too much power. Lu Li became too arrogant, planting his own people everywhere until they knew only Lord Lu and forgot the emperor. His fall wasn't just about the maps. It was inevitable. I looked out the window at the passing shadows. Lu Li's defeat started with the maps, but the root was always the emperor's will. The maps were just the spark. Li Wenjong looked at me deeply, realizing I was far more clear-headed than he had imagined. To serve a king is to live with a tiger. Favor is a gift, but it's also a trap. One wrong step, and you fall into the abyss. First it was Lu Li, now it's Ma Song, and me, and eventually you. We sat in silence, 2 men caught in the same swirling vortex of power, watching the world move toward an uncertain fate. I didn't expect this. Li Wenjong had always been a cautious man, the very definition of a traditional, disciplined general. Yet here he was, pouring his heart out to me. He was about to become the great general of the Dragon Guard, one of the emperor's most trusted inner circle. Aren't you afraid I'll tell the emperor what you just said? I asked, my lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. Li Wenjong leaned back, looking at me with steady, calm eyes. I've known you only a short time, and I can't say I know your soul. But I'm a good judge of character. I don't see fear or reverence in your eyes. Not when you look at me, and not even when you speak of the emperor. He paused, his voice dropping an octave. I am not as loyal as I appear. And neither are you. We are the same kind of person. I stayed silent, letting his words hang in the air. Listen, I think highly of you. As long as you don't make any massive blunders, you might be the one to break the centuries-old rule that prevents imperial in-laws from holding real power. If that day comes, I might be the one relying on you. Consider this my early investment. He smiled, raised his teacup toward me in a silent toast, and drained it in one go. I sat in silence for a long time before finally raising my own cup to return the gesture. They say the truly wise often appear foolish, I said with a laugh. People say the court officials are the smartest men alive, but if you had chosen the path of a scholar instead of a soldier, your achievements wouldn't fall short of theirs. It's almost a pity you're a general. Li Wenjong shook his head with a sigh. In this capital, the waters are deep and full of monsters. Between the emperor and the clouds, the soaring nobles, the predatory henchmen, and the politicians hiding in the shadows. Who among them isn't brilliant? In a place like this, how can one not be careful? It's like walking on thin ice. His gaze sharpened as it landed on me again. But you are the most intelligent junior I've seen in years. Uncle, please, I cut him off, waving my hand. Let's stop praising each other. It's getting embarrassing. The carriage rolled on. We both lapsed into our own thoughts, the only sound being the rhythmic thud of hooves. Then, out of the quiet, Li Wenjong spoke again. If there comes a day when I fall from grace, will you protect my family? I looked at him, my expression turning grave. There was a sudden weight of sorrow in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just being paranoid. He was being realistic. "Why so pessimistic, uncle?" I asked softly. "Do you know how many great generals of the Dragon Guard we've had in the last 50 years? His voice was eerily calm. 8. And 5 of those were in the last 20 years alone. I felt a chill. 5 generals in less than 20 years. That wasn't a promotion, it was a death sentence. "The Emperor is becoming harder to read," Li Wenjong whispered. "His suspicion grows every day. The only general who had a good ending was Zhao Chong, 30 years ago. He actually got to retire. Every single one since then has had their family estate seized and their lineage wiped out." I nodded solemnly. I understood now. Li Wenjong wasn't just betting on me. He was betting on the Marquis of Andong's house behind me. He knew his time at the top might only last 4 years. He was securing a future for his family by showing me his weakness, giving me a handle on him as a gesture of sincerity. Suddenly, the carriage lurched to a halt. "Master," the old servant called out from the front. "A carriage is blocking the road. By the markings, it belongs to the third prince." Li Wenjong's brow furrowed. His predecessor had fallen precisely because he got too close to the crown prince. Now, the third prince was blocking his path. This was a dangerous signal. "Tell them to move. Let them pass first," Li Wenjong ordered. But they weren't moving. Zhengde Street was wide enough for 6 carriages, yet the luxury coach in front of us stayed planted. They were here for him. The curtain of the luxury carriage drifted open, revealing the handsome, smiling face of the third prince. "I heard General Li is moving up in the world. I was so happy for you that I had to stop and say hello. The Deshun restaurant is right ahead. Officials always celebrate their promotions there. Why don't we go have a drink together?" Li Wenjong didn't hesitate. He opened our curtain, his face like a mask of ice. "Your Highness, I have urgent business at home. I cannot go. If I hold a banquet later, I will be sure to send you an invitation." He was keeping his distance. Everyone knew the third prince and the crown prince were at each other's throats. If Li Wenjong was seen drinking with the third prince now, he'd lose his new position before he even started. "The general is being too cautious," the third prince laughed, acting bold and carefree. "I've admired you for a long time. Besides, we met on a public street, not in private. My father is a man of great vision. He wouldn't suspect you over a simple meal." "Your Highness, I truly cannot," Li Wenjong repeated, shaking his head. The third prince was clearly up to something. If he really wanted to recruit the general, he would have done it secretly. Doing it in broad daylight was a trap. "Oh," the third prince smirked. "Is it that urgent? Is one of your concubines about to give birth today?" Li Wenjong's eye twitched, but he didn't miss a beat. He cupped his hands respectfully. "My wife is very virtuous. Since my family line is thin, she has arranged a matchmaking session for me today to pick out some new concubines. I expect by this time next year, someone will be giving birth. I'll be sure to invite you for the celebratory wine then." I sat in the corner, trying to keep a straight face. Li Wenjong was a better liar than I thought. He had just completely shut the prince down by using a ridiculous excuse about a concubine recruitment drive. The third prince choked on his next words. He had expected to corner the general, but Li Wenjong was out talking him. His smile faded slightly as his gaze shifted past the general, his eyes landing directly on me. I didn't expect to run into an old acquaintance so soon. I looked out and saw the third prince staring back at me. "Is that the young master of the Xia family?" he asked. "Greetings, Your Highness," I replied. I cupped my hands in a respectful gesture, but I didn't bother getting out of the carriage. I stayed right where I was. The third prince waved his hand dismissively, acting incredibly warm and friendly. "You are the fiancé of my sister, the future empress. We're practically family. There's no need for such formalities." He flashed a bright smile. "Young Master Xia, General Li here is a bit too timid. He's afraid of rumors, so he won't join me for a drink. Why don't you and I go grab a few cups instead?" I looked at him and smiled back just as warmly. "Since we're family, you're right. We shouldn't be so formal. Your Highness, you can just call me brother-in-law from now on. I'll keep calling you Your Highness to show respect, but otherwise, calling me anything else just feels distant." I even reached my hand out of the carriage window, looking like I was about to grab his hand in friendship. The third prince's face twitched. He was clearly caught off guard. Neither the general nor I was playing by the rules today. He was 20 years old, and I was only 17. Asking him to call a teenager brother-in-law was a massive blow to his ego. But technically, based on rank and family ties, I was right. He cursed his father under his breath for putting him in this awkward position. He looked at my face, young, handsome, and full of confidence, and felt a sudden surge of jealousy. I was younger, higher in the family hierarchy, and, frankly, much better looking than him. Still, he forced a stiff smile onto his face. "Brother-in-law," he squeezed out. "Your Highness," I replied, beaming. This trip to the palace was turning out to be very productive. I had just gained a powerful, if temporary, little brother-in-law. I knew his secret, though. This man was ambitious. In the future, he would be the one to launch a bloody coup, killing his brothers and betraying his family. He was a dangerous man to have as a relative. As our carriages sat in the middle of Jingda Street, the crowds began to whisper. Peddlers and shopkeepers stopped to watch. They recognized the third prince's carriage and the carriage of General Li. Rumors were already flying. People were sending messages back to their masters, sensing the shifting political winds. I leaned back and looked at the prince one last time. "Your Highness, your brother-in-law has things to do at home. Unlike the general, I don't have concubines waiting to give birth or matchmaking sessions to attend. I'm completely devoted to your sister. You can rest easy on that. Let's catch up another day." I dropped the curtain before he could respond. My carriage began to move, leaving the third prince standing alone in the middle of the street. Inside his own carriage, a beautiful maid hissed in anger. "That General Li and Xiachun are too bold. They don't show you any respect at all." The prince sat there, his face a mask of cold indifference. One is the emperor's man, and the other is the heir of the Xia family. By rank, he is my superior. I'm not the crown prince yet. Why would they care what I think? But they were so rude, the maid complained. Especially Xiachun, taking advantage of you like that. "I knew they wouldn't come for drinks," the prince said calmly. "I only came here to annoy them. I wanted to stir up trouble between General Li and my father. As for Xiachun, I actually want him on my side. I saw him fight at the White Moon Pavilion. He's a real talent. Even my father wants to use him now." He leaned back into the maid's lap, a cold smile playing on his lips. "He's younger than me, and calling him brother-in-law is humiliating, but if it gets me the support of the Marquis of Anong, it's worth it. With that military power in my hands, it won't matter if I'm the crown prince or not." He closed his eyes, his voice turning bitter. "My father has been obsessed with immortality for 50 years. He treats me like a pawn to balance the crown prince's power. He will never give me the throne, no matter how good I am. I am just a tool to him." His voice went ice cold. "If he wants me to be a tool, I'll be one. He thinks he's a god who can control everything. We'll see about that." Back in our carriage, Li Wenzhong looked at me. He seemed like he was coming for me, but his real target was you. "He just wants the power of the Xia family," I said dismissively. "Too bad for him. My father doesn't even like me." "The Marquis might not value you," Li Wenzhong noted, "but your uncle, Xia Qian, certainly does. And he's the one actually running the family right now." I just smiled and didn't answer. We reached Wendao Street, where the grand estate of the Marquis of Anong stood. "I have to report to the lantern bearers tomorrow," I said, changing the subject. "What about my position in the Imperial Guard?" "The Emperor didn't say otherwise," Li Wenzhong replied after a moment. "It looks like you'll be holding both positions at once." I nodded. The game was getting more complicated, but for the first time, I felt like I was the one making the moves. I hopped off the carriage and gave a casual wave before turning into the Marquis's estate. I didn't go back to my own courtyard. I went straight to see my uncle, Xia Qian. Emperor Wen had officially transferred me to the lantern bearers. On the surface, he wanted me to investigate a case and find a mole. But I knew better. There was always a deeper meaning with the Emperor. Even if I didn't get along with my father, I was still a member of the Xia family. We already held massive military power. Was the Emperor really not afraid of us infiltrating his intelligence network? It felt like a dangerous game. I found Xia Qian and explained everything to him. I didn't leave out a single detail. He listened, his face a mask of calm. "I already know about this," he said. He looked at me for a long moment, then told me to take the lead on the next move.